The afternoon sun hammered down on Black Hollow like divine punishment, baking the wooden storefronts and turning the dirt streets into powder that stuck to everything it touched. 3 years ago, this had been a decent place. Not prosperous, not notable, but decent. Families had lived here. Children had played in those same streets. The church bell had rung on Sundays, and people had known each other's names without fear behind their eyes. That version of Black Hollow was dead now. Evelyn Shaw had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. She knelt in the center of the street, hands bound behind her back, rope cutting circulation until her fingers tingled and burned. Her dress, the nice one she'd saved for occasions that mattered, was torn at the shoulder, dirt-stained and ruined. Boone Mercer stood behind her, one boot planted in the dust beside her knee, playing to an audience that didn't want to watch but couldn't risk looking away. "You see what happens," Boone called out, voice carrying across the unnatural silence. "When people forget how things work around here?" Nobody answered. Faces appeared briefly in windows before vanishing behind curtains. Doors remained shut. The only sound was wind pushing tumbleweeds down empty alleys and the creak of the saloon sign swinging on rusty chains. Boone was a tall man, built like he'd been assembled for the specific purpose of intimidation. Broad shoulders, thick arms, a jaw that looked carved from granite. But it wasn't his size that made him dangerous. Plenty of big men lacked the stomach for real violence. What made Boone different was the emptiness in his eyes. The way he looked at people like they were obstacles or tools. Nothing more. He wore that emptiness like other men wore confidence, and it infected everyone around him. "I asked you a simple question 3 days ago, Miss Shaw." Boone crouched beside her, speaking quiet enough that the crowd had to strain to hear. "Real simple. I said I'd like the pleasure of your company for dinner. You remember that?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. Blood trickled from her split lip where one of Boone's men had struck her an hour earlier. She didn't answer. "I'm talking to you." Boone's hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her face toward his. "When a man speaks to you in this town, you answer. That's basic manners." "Go to hell," Evelyn said. The words came out steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. She'd known this would happen. Known it the moment she'd told Boone no in front of his men at the general store. Knew it when she'd barricaded her door that night and waited for the inevitable knock. Knew it when they dragged her from her home this morning and paraded her through the streets like a prize. But knowing didn't make it easier. Knowing didn't stop her hands from shaking or her heart from hammering against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Boone's smile was worse than his anger. See, that's exactly the kind of disrespect I'm talking about. You think you're special, Evelyn? You think because your daddy used to run the bank before he got smart and left town, that makes you different from anyone else here. My father didn't get smart. He got scared, like everyone else. Smart and scared look the same when you're still breathing. Boone stood, releasing her chin with a small push that nearly toppled her. He turned to address the hidden watchers, raising his voice again. "This town's got a memory problem. People keep forgetting who's in charge. They keep thinking maybe things will change. Maybe someone will ride in and fix everything like some fairy tale." He paused, letting the words hang in the scorched air. "So let me remind you, my name is Boone Mercer. I've killed 17 men. Some of them needed killing. Most of them just needed to learn the same lesson I'm teaching today. And every single one of them thought they were braver than they actually were." Frank Dawson, Boone's second in command, leaned against a hitching post nearby, rifle cradled casually in his arms. He was leaner than Boone, wiry and quick, with the kind of smile that made you think he'd enjoyed pulling wings off flies as a child. 2 more gang members lounged in the shade of the general store, Dutch Keller and Sam Pike. Both young, both stupid enough to think riding with Boone made them invincible. "Boss," Frank said, voice carrying an edge of amusement, "you want me to get the horse ready? Reckon Miss Shaw here might benefit from a ride through town. Help everyone remember." Evelyn's stomach turned. She knew what that meant. They'd done it before to Thomas Grant when he'd tried to organize resistance 6 months ago. Tied him to a horse and dragged him through the streets until he begged them to stop, until his pride was broken along with 3 ribs and his spirit. "Not yet," Boone said. "I'm feeling generous today, giving her one more chance to apologize and accept my invitation properly. I already gave you my answer. The wrong one. It's the only one you're getting." Boone's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. The pretense of civility dropped away like a snake shedding skin. You know what your problem is, Evelyn? You think strength matters. You think if you stand tall and refuse to bend, that makes you brave. But bravery without power is just stupidity wearing a fancy name. He gestured broadly at the silent buildings. Look around. You see anybody rushing to help you? You see the good people of Black Hollow forming a mob to run us out of town? Evelyn didn't look. She knew what she'd see. Nothing. Same thing she'd seen when they dragged her from her house. Same thing everyone saw when Boone's gang took what they wanted. That's what I thought, Boone continued, because these people understand something you don't. They understand that I'm not going anywhere. Sheriff Reed doesn't stop me. The mayor doesn't stop me. Nobody stops me because nobody can. So when I ask you to dinner, you say yes. When I tell you to smile, you smile. When I tell you to... The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through his words. Everyone froze. The bullet hadn't hit anyone. It had struck the dirt 3 feet from Boone's boot, kicking up a small spray of dust. For a moment, the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Then Boone turned slowly, hand dropping to his pistol. At the far end of the street, a rider sat motionless on a dark horse. Distance and dust made him hard to see clearly, but his silhouette was unmistakable. A lone man, rifle in hand, watching them with the patience of someone who'd done this before. "The hell?" Dutch muttered, straightening from his slouch. Frank pushed off the hitching post, rifle coming up to a ready position. "You want me to handle this, boss?" Boone held up one hand, eyes never leaving the distant figure. "Hold on." The rider nudged his horse forward, slow, deliberate, each hoof fall measured and purposeful. As he drew closer, details emerged from the heat shimmer. Weathered duster coat, worn boots, a face that looked like it had been carved from sun-baked leather and hard years. His hat brim was pulled low, shadowing his eyes, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke to violence held in check. He wasn't young, somewhere past 40, maybe pushing 50, though the frontier aged men in ways that made counting difficult. Gray streaked his dark hair, and lines creased the corners of his eyes and mouth, the kind of lines that came from squinting into too many sunrises and making too many hard choices. But his hands were steady on the reins. His rifle, a Winchester, well-maintained, rested across his saddle with the ease of long familiarity. "You got something to say?" Boone called out, voice carrying across the narrowing distance. "Or you just shooting at dirt for fun?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. He rode closer, stopping about 20 feet away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, rough from disuse, carrying an accent that suggested he'd spent time in different territories. "Let her go." 3 words, simple, direct. No threats, no posturing. Boone laughed. It started as a chuckle and built into something genuinely amused. "Let her go, that's it? That's your whole plan?" Wasn't a request. Sounded like one to me. Boone's hand remained near his pistol, fingers drumming against his thigh. "You know who I am, stranger." "Don't care." "You should. Name's Boone Mercer. I run this town." "You terrorize it. There's a difference." Frank took a step forward, rifle pointed loosely at the stranger. "You got about 10 seconds to turn that horse around before you end up bleeding in the street." The stranger's eyes moved to Frank. Just his eyes, not his head, not his body. Something about that minimal movement made Frank hesitate. "I count 4 of you," the stranger said. "Maybe 5 if there's someone I'm not seeing. Against one of me. Those are your odds. Think carefully about whether you want to test them." Dutch laughed nervously. "This guy's serious, boss. He thinks he's gonna—" "Cut the woman loose," the stranger interrupted, gaze returning to Boone. "Get on your horses. Ride out. Nobody needs to die today." "Nobody except maybe you," Sam Pike added, drawing his pistol with a flourish that suggested he'd practiced the move in front of mirrors. The stranger sighed, a small sound, barely audible, but heavy with resignation. "Your choice." Everything happened fast. Sam Pike fired first, eager and sloppy, the shot going wide by 2 feet. The stranger's rifle came up smooth, almost lazy, and the return shot caught Sam in the shoulder before his second bullet cleared the barrel. Sam went down hard, screaming, pistol flying from his grip. Dutch fumbled for his gun, panic overriding training he'd never really had. The stranger's next shot took him in the leg, spinning him sideways into the dirt. Frank managed to get his rifle up, but the stranger had already dismounted. somehow covering ground that should have taken longer, moving with economical precision that spoke to training and experience. Frank's shot went high. The stranger's didn't. Frank collapsed against the hitching post, hand pressed to his side, rifle clattering away. The entire exchange lasted maybe 6 seconds. Boone hadn't drawn. He stood completely still, watching, recalculating. His hand hovered near his pistol, but he didn't reach for it. Not yet. The stranger walked forward, rifle leveled at Boone's chest. "I said cut her loose." "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Boone said quietly. "I've made worse." They stared at each other across the dusty space. Neither man blinked. Neither man moved. Behind Boone, Evelyn struggled against her bonds, hope and terror warring on her face. She'd stopped breathing without realizing it, lungs burning for air she couldn't seem to draw. "You kill me," Boone said. "You'll have the whole territory looking for you. I've got friends, allies, people who... You've got men who work for you because they're afraid or stupid. Fear and stupidity aren't loyalty. The minute you're gone, they'll scatter like rats. You don't know that. I've seen it before." Boone's jaw worked. His eyes flicked to Frank, still breathing but bleeding, then to Dutch and Sam, both incapacitated. The math was simple and brutal. He'd lost this fight before it started, and continuing would only confirm what the stranger already knew. "This isn't over," Boone finally said. "Yes, it is. You're just too proud to admit it yet. Cut her loose yourself if you want her free so bad." Boone stepped back, hands rising slightly in a gesture of temporary surrender. "But know this. You just signed both your death warrants. Sundown tomorrow, I'm going to kill you in this same street. I'm going to make this whole town watch, and they're going to remember what happens when someone tries to be a hero." The stranger didn't respond. He moved past Boone, angling toward Evelyn, keeping the rifle trained back in case of surprises. When he reached her, he pulled a knife from his belt, a well-worn blade that had clearly seen hard use, and cut through the ropes with quick, efficient movements. Evelyn gasped as circulation returned to her hands, pins and needles shooting up her arms. She nearly fell, but the stranger caught her elbow, steadying her with a grip that was surprisingly gentle. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then walk. Don't run. Head toward the saloon." "Who are you?" "Nobody." "You're not nobody. You just walk." Evelyn walked. Her legs trembled, but she forced them steady, refusing to show weakness now that she'd been given a chance at dignity. The stranger followed, rifle still trained on Boone, walking backward with a confidence that suggested he'd done this exact thing too many times to count. The saloon doors stood half open 20 yards away. They might as well have been miles. "Tomorrow," Boone called after them. "Sundown. You better be ready." The stranger didn't answer. He didn't need to. The bodies in the street spoke for themselves. Shake. Inside the saloon, Clara Voss was already moving. She'd seen enough through the window to know what was coming. The older woman, somewhere in her 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen everything worth seeing, grabbed Evelyn the moment she stumbled through the doors and hustled her toward the back room. "Upstairs," Clara ordered. "Second door on the left. Lock it. Don't come out until I tell you." "But now, Evelyn." Evelyn went. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed to argue. Her feet found the stairs through muscle memory, and then she was in the small room Clara used for storage, surrounded by crates of whiskey and clean linens, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Downstairs, Clara turned to face the stranger, who stood just inside the doors, scanning the dim interior with practiced caution. The saloon was empty except for them. Everyone else had scattered when the shooting started. "You got a name?" Clara asked. "Not one I use anymore." "You got a death wish?" "Had one. Got over it." Clara moved behind the bar, pulling out a bottle and 2 glasses without asking if he wanted a drink. She poured generous measures, sliding one across the scarred wood toward him. "You just made an enemy you can't beat," she said flatly. The stranger took the glass but didn't drink. "I've had worse enemies." "Not here you haven't. Boone Mercer owns this town. He's got 15 more men scattered around the territory. Some in the mine works north of here, some running protection for the stage routes. They'll all come running once word gets out what happened today." "Then I'll be ready." "Will you?" Clara leaned forward, elbows on the bar. Or are you one of those fool idealists who thinks right makes might and justice conquers all? For the first time, something like a smile touched the stranger's weathered face. I stopped believing in justice about 20 years ago. Then why'd you do it? Why risk your neck for a girl you don't know in a town you just rode into? The stranger finally took a drink, the whiskey burning down his throat with familiar warmth. When he set the glass down, his eyes were distant, focused on something Clara couldn't see. Because I didn't once, and I've been paying for it ever since. Before Clara could respond, the saloon doors banged open. Sheriff Elias Reed stumbled in, hand on his pistol but not drawing it, eyes wide with panic that he was trying desperately to hide behind official authority. "What the hell did you just do?" Elias demanded, voice cracking slightly. The sheriff was younger than the stranger by maybe a decade, but he looked older, worn down by compromise and fear until his spine had bent permanent. His badge was tarnished, his clothes disheveled, his face carrying the permanent expression of a man who'd stopped sleeping well years ago. "I stopped a woman from being abused," the stranger said calmly. "You just started a war. War was already here. I just made it obvious." Elias moved closer, lowering his voice even though there was nobody else to hear. "You don't understand. Boone's not just some outlaw. He's got connections, protection. I can't—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I can't protect you." "I didn't ask you to." "Then what do you want? Why are you even here?" The stranger looked at the sheriff, really looked at him, reading the defeat in every line of his posture, the shame barely hidden behind defensive anger. "I was passing through, saw something wrong, stopped it. Just like that. Just like that. And tomorrow when Boone kills you, what then? Maybe he will. Maybe he won't." Elias laughed bitterly. "You're insane, you know that? Completely insane. Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of watching." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Elias flinched, hand falling away from his pistol. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Anger, shame, recognition, but it died before it could fully form. "I can't help you," Elias said quietly. "Nobody asked you to. Boone will kill you, and then he'll kill everyone who didn't stop you. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." The stranger poured himself another drink. "Then I guess you better hope I'm faster than him." Elias opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He stood there, hand trembling slightly, badge catching the light streaming through the dusty windows. Then he turned and walked out, shoulders hunched, a man drowning in his own cowardice. Clara waited until the doors stopped swinging before speaking. "He's right, you know. Boone will kill you. Probably. And you're staying anyway." "I am. Why?" The stranger stared into his whiskey glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "Because someone has to. Because walking away again would kill me slower than any bullet. Because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I used to be a lawman, long time ago, different territory, and I let something bad happen because I was afraid. Because I thought there'd be a better time to act, a safer moment to stand up. What happened? People died. Good people. People I swore to protect." He drained the glass in one swallow. "Never found that better moment. Turned out fear just keeps finding new excuses." Clara studied him with eyes that had seen enough liars to recognize truth. "You got a plan?" "Not really." "You got backup?" "You're looking at it." "You got anything at all besides stubbornness and a death wish?" The stranger smiled, a genuine smile this time, sad and knowing. "I've got experience, and I've got nothing left to lose. Sometimes that's enough. And sometimes it gets you killed." "True, but at least I'll die standing up." He met her gaze directly. "That girl upstairs, Evelyn, she got any family?" "Father left town 6 months ago. Couldn't take it anymore. Mother died when she was young. She's got nobody." "She got somewhere safe to go after this?" "If there's an after this, nowhere in Black Hollow will be safe for her. Boone doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive." The stranger nodded slowly, processing that information. "Then I better make sure there is no Boone to remember." "You really think you can beat 15 men?" "Won't be 15. Word won't spread that fast. Tomorrow it'll just be Boone and whoever's close enough to matter. Maybe 7, 8 at most. That's still terrible odds. I've survived worse." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." Before Clara could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Evelyn emerged from the back hallway, face still pale, but voice steady. "I want to help," she said. The stranger shook his head. "You've done enough. Time for you to stay out of sight." "This is my fight too." "No, it's not. It's Boone's fight and mine. You're just the excuse we're using." Evelyn's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't patronize me. I've lived in this town my whole life. I've watched Boone and his men terrorize everyone I know. I've seen good people turn into cowards because nobody would stand with them. And now you ride in like a fool," the stranger finished. "That's what you were going to say, right?" "I was going to say like someone who doesn't understand what he's up against." "I understand perfectly. I understand that this town died 3 years ago, and everyone here is just going through the motions, pretending life and fear are the same thing. I understand that Boone's got you all convinced he's invincible because nobody's tested that theory. And I understand that tomorrow, when he comes for me, everybody will watch from behind locked doors and convince themselves they had no choice." The bluntness of his words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn stepped back, stung. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Fair doesn't live in Black Hollow anymore. It left the same time courage did." Clara set down her glass with enough force to crack it. "That's enough, both of you." The stranger turned to her. "I need a room, somewhere I can see the street. You'll get killed standing at a window." "I'll get killed not standing at one. At least this way I can see them coming." Clara sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. "Third room, end of the hall, window faces main street. Lock's broken, so you'll need to barricade it." "That'll do." He started toward the stairs, then paused, looking back at Evelyn. "I'm sorry. What I said, that was true," Evelyn interrupted quietly. "Every word. We are cowards. All of us. And you're right. We'll watch you die and tell ourselves we had no choice." Her voice hardened. "But that doesn't mean I have to like it, and it doesn't mean I won't try to change it." The stranger held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a gesture of respect between two people who understood loss, and continued up the stairs. The room was exactly what he'd expected. Sparse, functional, smelling of dust and old tobacco. A narrow bed, a washstand with a cracked basin, a chair with one leg shorter than the others. The window faced the street as promised, offering a clear view of the bloodstains already darkening in the sun where Dutch and Sam had fallen. The stranger set his rifle on the bed and moved to the window, studying sightlines and angles. The building across the street had a good second-story position. So did the general store. The livery stable offered cover for anyone smart enough to use it. A skilled shooter could place him in a crossfire from 3 directions before he cleared leather. But Boone wasn't smart. Boone was arrogant, and arrogance made men predictable. A soft knock interrupted his assessment. "Yeah?" The door opened to reveal Evelyn carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and water. "Thought you might be hungry." "I'm fine." "You need to eat. Can't fight on an empty stomach." He wanted to argue, but recognized the same stubborn determination he'd seen in himself at her age. Instead, he gestured to the rickety table. "Set it there." She did, then lingered in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something but uncertain how to start. "Go ahead," the stranger said, sitting in the broken chair and testing its balance. "Ask." "Earlier, you said you used to be a lawman. That's not a question. What happened?" He picked up a piece of bread, examining it without much interest. "I told you, I let people die. That's not the whole story. It's the only part that matters." Evelyn came further into the room, closing the door behind her. "I need to understand. Why would you throw your life away for strangers? For people who won't even help you?" The stranger took a bite of bread, chewed slowly, swallowed. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. 10 years ago, I was a deputy marshal in a town called Redemption Creek. Beautiful place. Mountains, clear water, good people trying to build something decent. There was a man there named Jacob Holloway. He ran a protection racket, same as Boone does here. Charged businesses for safety, roughed up anyone who didn't pay. He paused, staring at the darkening bloodstains visible through the window. I knew what Jacob was. Everyone knew. But he was careful. Never did the violence himself. Always had men to handle it. And he had friends, real friends, powerful friends, who made sure legal trouble never stuck. What did you do? Nothing. That's the point. I told myself I was being smart, waiting for the right evidence, the right moment, building a case that couldn't be beaten. Meanwhile, Jacob got bolder, started taking more, hurting more people. His hands tightened on the bread, crushing it. There was a girl, Sarah Merriweather, 16 years old, worked at her father's bakery. Jacob wanted her. She said no. So he had his men burn the bakery down with her father inside. Evelyn's breath caught. I still waited. Told myself I needed ironclad proof. Told myself rushing in would only make things worse. And while I waited, Sarah disappeared. Found her 3 days later in an abandoned mine shaft. Dead. Used up and discarded like trash. The stranger's voice remained steady, but his eyes betrayed the depth of his guilt. I arrested Jacob the next day, brought him in, testified at his trial, but his lawyers got him off on technical grounds, evidence obtained improperly, witnesses intimidated, the usual dance. He walked free, and I realized something. What? That justice is a lie we tell ourselves to feel better about inaction. Real protection, the kind that actually saves people, it's not pretty, it's not legal, it's just necessary. So you became an outlaw? I became someone who doesn't wait anymore. Someone who sees wrong and stops it. Consequences be damned. He met her eyes directly. Tomorrow I'm probably going to die. And that's fine. Because tonight, you're safe. Tonight, Boone is afraid instead of confident. Tonight, every person in this town gets to feel what it's like when someone stands up instead of bending over. Even if it's just for one night, that matters. Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It's not enough. Maybe not, but it's something, and something beats nothing every time. She nodded slowly, understanding even if she didn't agree. Thank you for what you did today. Don't thank me yet. Thank me tomorrow if I'm still breathing. And if you're not? The stranger smiled grimly. Then thank me for trying. Evelyn left quietly, closing the door behind her. The stranger finished the bread mechanically, tasting nothing, then stretched out on the bed with his rifle across his chest. Through the window, the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of fire. Tomorrow would come fast, and when it did, Black Hollow would learn what happened when fear finally met someone who'd stopped running from it. He closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. It never did before a fight. Instead, he lay there in the gathering darkness, counting his remaining bullets and making peace with whatever morning would bring. Outside, the town held its breath and waited for sundown. Darkness settled over Black Hollow like a burial shroud, but sleep didn't come with it. The stranger lay motionless on the narrow bed, rifle still cradled against his chest, listening to the sounds of a town that had forgotten how to breathe properly. Footsteps moved too quickly on the boardwalks. Doors closed with unnecessary force. Voices carried through windows in urgent whispers that cut off abruptly when they remembered walls had ears. Fear had a sound, and Black Hollow was screaming it. Around midnight, he heard horses. Not many, 3, maybe 4, riding hard from the north. They pulled up somewhere near the edge of town, voices rising in sharp conversation before settling into the kind of quiet that meant trouble was gathering itself for the next round. Boone calling in reinforcements. The stranger had expected that. What surprised him was how fast word had traveled. Someone had ridden out within an hour of the shooting, which meant Boone had better organization than he'd initially credited. The stranger sat up, moving to the window in the darkness. His eyes had long since adjusted, turning the street below into a landscape of shadows and moonlight. The bloodstains were invisible now, swallowed by night, but he knew exactly where they'd been. Memory had a way of marking territory that vision couldn't erase. A light appeared in the sheriff's office across the street. Not the bright, confident glow of a law officer working late, but the guttering uncertainty of a candle held by shaking hands. Through the window, Sheriff Elias Reed's silhouette paced back and forth, jerky movements that spoke to panic barely contained. The stranger watched for a while, reading the sheriff's body language like a book written in a language he'd learned too well. Elias would stop occasionally, stare at something, probably a bottle, then resume pacing. Once, he moved to the door as if to leave, hand on the knob, before retreating back into his tight circle of fear. A knock on the stranger's door broke his observation. Soft, hesitant. It's open. Clara stepped inside, carrying a lantern that she immediately shuddered to a dim glow. Can't sleep either? Sleep's overrated. She moved to the window beside him, following his gaze to the sheriff's office. Elias hasn't slept properly in 3 years, not since Boone took his son. The stranger turned to look at her. Took? Clara nodded, her weathered face showing every one of her years in the lamplight. Michael Reed. He was 15 when it happened. Good kid. Helped his father around the office, talked about becoming a lawman himself someday. Then one day he went fishing up at Miller's Creek and never came home. And Boone? Sent word 2 days later, said Michael was safe, being well treated, and would stay that way as long as Elias remembered his place. Sent a lock of the boy's hair to prove he had him. Every few months since, another message, another reminder, always just enough to keep Elias compliant, but never enough to give him hope. The stranger's jaw tightened. You know where the boy is? Nobody knows. Could be anywhere in the territory. Could be dead, with Boone just stringing Elias along, but Elias can't take that chance. So he wears that badge and does exactly nothing while Boone runs wild. That's not being a lawman. That's being a hostage with a title. Tell that to a father who's trying to keep his son alive. The stranger didn't respond immediately. He understood the logic, understood it too well. Fear didn't make people irrational. Fear made them practical in the worst possible ways, turning survival into a math problem where principles became negotiable and courage became expendable. How old is Michael now? He asked finally. Would be 18, if he's still breathing. And nobody's tried to find him? Clara's laugh was bitter. Who? Elias can't risk looking because any sign of resistance gets Michael killed. The rest of us are too scared to try, and anyone passing through town either doesn't care or doesn't stay long enough to matter. She paused. Until you. I'm not staying either. You're staying long enough to get killed. That's longer than most. The stranger turned back to the window, watching Elias's shadow continue its desperate circuit. He's going to have to choose tomorrow, when Boone comes. He's going to have to decide what matters more, the son he hasn't seen in 3 years or the town he's supposed to protect. He's already chosen. He chose the moment Boone took Michael. Then he chose wrong. Easy to say when it's not your child. The stranger's expression hardened. I never said it was easy, just that it was wrong. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who'd seen enough of the world to recognize when idealism ran headlong into reality and shattered. Why are you really here? Clara asked quietly. And don't give me that redemption speech you fed Evelyn. That's part of it, sure, but it's not all. The stranger considered lying, then decided against it. Something about Clara's directness demanded honesty in return. I'm dying anyway. Clara's eyes widened slightly. What? Consumption. Doctor in Denver gave me 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. That was 4 months ago. He tapped his chest. Some mornings I can feel it in there, eating away. Won't be long before the coughing starts, then the blood, then the slow fade. So you're what? Looking for a faster way out? Looking for a way that means something. Rather go down fighting than waste away in some boarding house, drowning in my own lungs. Clara absorbed this information with the practiced calm of someone who'd heard too many sad stories to be shocked anymore. Does it hurt? Not yet, but it will. And you think dying here is better than dying in a bed? I think dying for something is better than dying for nothing, and I think if I can take Boone with me, maybe this town gets a chance to remember what it was before fear moved in and set up housekeeping. You're asking a lot from people who've forgotten how to stand. I'm not asking anything. I'm just doing what I should have done 10 years ago. He paused. The girl, Sarah Merriweather. After she died, after Jacob walked free, you know what I did? Ran? Turned in my badge. Told myself I was taking a stand, making a statement. Truth was, I just couldn't face the mirror anymore. Couldn't look at that piece of tin without seeing her face. His hand moved unconsciously to his chest where a badge had once sat. Spent the next decade drifting, taking odd jobs, drinking too much, avoiding anything that looked like responsibility. Then the cough started, and the doctor gave me his verdict, and I realized I'd wasted 10 years being angry at myself without actually doing anything about it. So you rode into Black Hollow looking for a fight? No, I rode into Black Hollow looking for a grave. The fight found me. Clara studied him with eyes that had learned to read people the way miners read rock strata, looking for truth beneath layers of protective sediment. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most broken. Can it be both? Before Clara could answer, a commotion erupted in the street below. Doors banged open, voices shouted, and suddenly the darkness was filled with the kind of noise that meant violence had arrived early. The stranger grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. Below, a group of riders, 7 men, all armed, had gathered in front of the saloon. Boone sat at the center on a massive gray stallion, looking up at the building with the patient certainty of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. "Stranger," Boone's voice carried easily in the night air. "I know you're in there. Come on out so we can talk like civilized men." Clara hissed a curse. "He's early. Wasn't supposed to be until sundown tomorrow." "Plans change." The stranger checked his rifle, then moved toward the door. Clara grabbed his arm. "You walk out there now, you're dead. 7 against 1 in the dark. Those aren't odds, that's suicide." "Probably. But if I don't go, he'll burn the saloon down with everyone inside. That's how men like Boone think. Can't get to the target, punish everyone around it until the target comes to you. Then we barricade. Make him wait. And tomorrow it's 10 men instead of 7. Day after that, 15. He's testing me, seeing if I'll hide. If I do, he wins without firing a shot." The stranger pulled free of Clara's grip and headed for the stairs. She followed, still protesting, but he ignored her. His mind had already shifted into the cold, clear space where fear became background noise and action became instinct. The saloon's main room was empty except for Evelyn, who stood behind the bar with a shotgun clutched in white-knuckled hands. She looked up as the stranger descended, and her eyes widened. "Don't," she said. "Have to. You don't have to do anything. We can—" "Evelyn." His voice was gentle but firm. "Whatever you're about to suggest, I've already considered it. This is the only way that doesn't end with innocent people burning. You'll die. Maybe. But I'll die fast, and Boone won't have leverage to hurt anyone else." He moved past her toward the doors, but Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Wait." The stranger turned. Evelyn had set down the shotgun and was fumbling with something behind the bar. She emerged holding a battered Colt revolver, old but well-maintained. "This was my father's," she said, voice shaking slightly. "He left it when he ran. Said he wouldn't need it where he was going, and I should keep it just in case." She held it out. "You might need a backup." The stranger took the gun, checking the cylinder. Fully loaded, good action. He tucked it into his belt. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just don't die." "I'll do my best." He pushed through the saloon doors and stepped onto the boardwalk. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the smell of horse sweat and gun oil. Boone's men had spread out in a loose semicircle, blocking any easy escape route. Not that the stranger had been planning to escape. "There he is!" Boone grinned, white teeth flashing in the moonlight. "The hero of Black Hollow. How's it feel knowing you've got less than a minute to live?" The stranger descended the steps slowly, rifle held loosely in one hand. "If you're going to talk me to death, this might take longer than you think." A few of Boone's men laughed nervously. Boone's smile tightened. "Funny. I like a man with humor. Makes killing him more interesting." "You said you wanted to talk, so talk." "Changed my mind. Decided talking was for yesterday. Tonight's for teaching lessons." Boone gestured broadly at the darkened buildings around them. "See? Everyone's watching. They're peeking through their curtains, hiding in their homes, waiting to see what happens when someone challenges me. And I need to make sure they see the right thing. Which is? That I'm the only law that matters in Black Hollow. That badges and bullets and brave words don't mean anything when they're up against real power. That heroes die just as easy as cowards. They just make more noise doing it." The stranger took another step forward, putting himself in the open street. His boots crunched on dirt that still held the memory of afternoon violence. "You've got 7 men. I've got a rifle and a borrowed pistol. You want to make a lesson out of this? I'm ready whenever you are." Boone's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his face before vanishing behind renewed confidence. "You're either crazy or stupid. Third option, I'm already dead, just walking around until my body figures it out. Makes a man fearless when he's got nothing left to lose." Everyone's got something to lose? Not me. Not anymore. For a long moment, nobody moved. The 7 men on horses stared at the lone figure standing in the street, trying to reconcile his calm with the mathematics of his situation. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. Surrounded men begged. They negotiated. They tried to run. They didn't just stand there like they were waiting for a stage. Then Frank, arm bandaged from his earlier wound but still mobile, broke the silence. "Boss, something ain't right about this." "What's not right is him still breathing," Boone snapped. "Light him up." Nobody moved. "I said light him up." Still nothing. The men shifted in their saddles, hands near weapons but not drawing. The stranger's unexpected composure had thrown them, inserting doubt where certainty should have lived. "You all deaf?" Boone's voice rose. "I'm giving you a direct order. Kill this man." The stranger's voice cut through Boone's anger like a knife through silk. "They're afraid." "The hell they are. They ride with me. They do what I say." "They ride with you because you scared them into it. Because they're young and stupid and thought your reputation would protect them. But I just put 3 of them down this afternoon without breaking a sweat, and now they're wondering if your reputation is worth dying for." Boone's face flushed red. "You got a lot of mouth for a man about to eat dirt. And you've got a lot of talk for someone who hasn't drawn yet." The challenge hung in the air like a physical thing. Boone's hand moved toward his pistol, then stopped. Around him, his men watched with the kind of attention that meant they were taking notes, measuring, calculating. "You want a straight fight?" Boone asked slowly. "Just you and me?" "I want you gone. How we get there doesn't matter to me. Because if you're really looking to die like a man instead of a dog, I'm happy to accommodate." Boone dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. "No rifles, just pistols. Draw when ready. Last man standing wins." The stranger considered this. A straight draw favored whoever was faster, and he had no idea how Boone ranked. But it also removed 6 other variables from the equation, which improved his odds considerably. "Your men stay mounted," the stranger said. "They even twitch toward their guns. Our deal's off." Boone turned to his crew. "You heard him. Nobody moves. This is between me and the stranger." Frank looked like he wanted to argue but swallowed it. The others nodded, hands moving deliberately away from their weapons. The stranger watched them carefully, reading body language for signs of betrayal, but saw only the kind of scared obedience that came from working for a violent boss. "One more thing," the stranger said. "I win, your men ride out of Black Hollow and don't come back. Ever." Boone laughed. "And if I win?" "Won't matter. I'll be dead." "Fair enough." Boone's hand rested on his pistol grip, fingers drumming a slow rhythm. "You got any last words? Anything you want carved on your marker?" The stranger thought about it. "Yeah, tell my story wrong." "What?" "When people ask what happened here, lie. Make me sound better than I was. Give me a name worth remembering, because the truth, that I was just a dying man looking for a fast exit, that's too sad to be useful." Something flickered across Boone's face. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred brokenness. It vanished quickly, replaced by cold focus. "On 3?" Boone asked. "On 3. They stood 20 feet apart, 2 men in a street that had seen this exact scene play out too many times. The watching town held its collective breath. Behind curtains and locked doors, people who'd spent 3 years looking away forced themselves to watch, knowing somehow that what happened next would determine whether Black Hollow stayed dead or found some small spark of resurrection. Boone started counting. 1. The stranger's breathing slowed, his mind sinking into the quiet place where thought became irrelevant and muscle memory took control. 2. Time stretched. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. Boone's hand, his eyes, the tiny tells that would telegraph his draw a fraction of a second before it happened. 3. Boone drew early, hand blurring toward his pistol before the word finished. It was a good trick, the kind of cheat that had probably worked dozens of times. But the stranger had expected it, had counted on it even, and his own hand was already moving. 2 shots crashed through the night, so close together they almost sounded like one. Boone's bullet went wide, clipping the stranger's shoulder and spinning him sideways. The stranger's shot didn't miss. It caught Boone's center mass, punching through his chest and dropping him like a puppet with cut strings. The stranger stumbled, pain flaring hot through his shoulder, but kept his feet. His gun stayed trained on Boone's fallen form, watching for movement. When none came, he shifted his aim to the mounted men. "Get off your horses," he said quietly, slowly. They complied, hands raised, eyes wide. These weren't hardened killers, they were scared young men who'd made bad choices and were just now realizing how bad. "Anyone here know first aid?" the stranger asked, nodding toward Boone's unmoving body. Frank dismounted, moving cautiously forward. He knelt beside Boone, fingers searching for a pulse he wouldn't find. After a moment, he looked up and shook his head. "He's gone." The stranger nodded, feeling nothing. No triumph, no relief, just the hollow acknowledgement that one problem had been solved while dozens more waited in the wings. "Now what?" Frank asked, voice small. "Now you make a choice. You can ride out like I said, find honest work somewhere else, and spend the rest of your lives trying to be better than you were. Or you can stay, try to rebuild what Boone built, and eventually I or someone like me will put you down too." The stranger's voice carried no anger, just exhausted certainty. "Your call." Frank looked at the other men, reading their faces. What he saw there must have been enough, because he stood slowly, hands still raised. "We'll ride out, tonight, right now." "Smart. What about our gear, supplies? Take whatever's yours, leave everything that belonged to Boone or the town, and if I ever hear about any of you terrorizing anyone anywhere, I'll come find you. That's a promise." Frank nodded quickly. "Understood." They gathered their belongings in nervous silence, moving fast, eager to be gone before someone changed their mind about letting them live. Within 10 minutes, all 6 remaining gang members were mounted and heading east, riding hard toward a horizon that promised nothing but at least offered distance from their mistakes. The stranger watched them go until they vanished into darkness, then finally allowed himself to look at his shoulder. Blood soaked his shirt, but the wound wasn't deep. A graze, painful but manageable. He'd been lucky. Boone's early draw had ruined his aim just enough to matter. Footsteps approached from behind. The stranger turned to find Sheriff Elias Reed standing there, pistol drawn but pointed at the ground, face pale in the moonlight. "You killed him," Elias said. "I did. You just killed Boone Mercer like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing, but it's done." Elias stared at Boone's body, expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood there, the badge on his chest catching stray light. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My son, if Boone's dead, whoever has Michael might..." "Might what?" The stranger's voice was harder now, patience wearing thin. "Might kill him? Sheriff, if your son's still alive after 3 years, it's not because of your cooperation. It's because he's useful leverage. And if whoever has him is smart, they'll realize that leverage just evaporated and cut their losses." "You don't know that." "No, I don't. But I know that trading a whole town's freedom for one boy's uncertain safety is a bad deal that just gets worse the longer it runs." Elias's hand tightened on his pistol. "That's easy to say when it's not your son." "You're right. It's not my son. But Sarah Merriweather was someone's daughter, and I let her die because I was being cautious. So don't talk to me about easy choices and hard truths. I've lived them." They faced each other across Boone's corpse, 2 men carrying different failures that led to the same place. "What am I supposed to do now?" Elias asked finally. "Your job. Arrest Boone's body, write a report, send word to the federal marshals that Black Hollow needs help cleaning up what's left of his operation. Find your son if you can, mourn him if you can't. But stop hiding behind that badge like it's a shield. It's supposed to be a responsibility." Elias flinched like he'd been slapped. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't spent every single day hating myself for it? I don't care what you've spent your days doing, Sheriff. I care what you do next. Because this town is watching. They saw me drop Boone. They saw his men run. And now they're waiting to see if their law officer finally steps up or keeps cowering." The stranger's voice softened slightly. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to give you a chance to be who you wanted to be before fear got its hooks in." Elias stood there, trembling, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. His pistol dangled forgotten in his grip. When he spoke again, his voice cracked. "I don't know if I can. Only one way to find out." The stranger turned away, heading back toward the saloon. Each step sent fresh pain through his shoulder, but he ignored it. Behind him, he heard Elias sob once, a broken sound that carried 3 years of compressed anguish. Then fall silent. Clara and Evelyn waited on the saloon steps, both holding weapons they wouldn't have known how to use properly. Relief flooded their faces when they saw him upright. You're bleeding, Evelyn said, rushing forward. I'm fine, just a graze. That's more than a graze. Get inside, let me look at it. Too tired to argue, the stranger allowed himself to be led back into the saloon. Clara locked the doors behind them and pulled the curtains while Evelyn gathered clean cloth and whiskey for disinfectant. Sit, Evelyn ordered, pointing to a chair. The stranger sat. Evelyn moved behind him, carefully peeling back his shirt to expose the wound. She hissed when she saw it. This needs stitches. Can you do it? I can try. Done it for horses before. Close enough. Clara brought over the whiskey bottle and poured a generous measure into a glass. This is for after, for the pain. Give it to me now, for during. Clara handed it over. The stranger downed it in one swallow, feeling the burn spread through his chest. A different kind of fire than the consumption, but just as insistent. Evelyn worked in concentrated silence, threading a needle with steady hands that betrayed none of the fear she'd shown earlier. The first puncture sent lightning through the stranger's shoulder, but he didn't move, didn't make a sound. He'd endured worse. You didn't have to do this, Evelyn said quietly, working the needle through torn flesh. Nobody expected you to. That's exactly why I had to. But why? Really, why? You said you're dying anyway, but that doesn't explain walking into a gunfight you didn't have to have. The stranger was quiet for a moment, feeling the tug and pull of thread through skin. You know what the worst part of the last 10 years has been? Not the guilt, though there's plenty of that. Not the loneliness, though that's there too. The worst part has been feeling useless. Feeling like I've been taking up space without justifying the air I breathe. So this is about redemption after all. No. Redemption requires forgiveness, and I'll never forgive myself. This is about utility, about spending my remaining time doing something that matters instead of wasting away in a corner somewhere, forgotten. Evelyn tied off a stitch, started the next one. You won't be forgotten here. Give it a week. I'll be a story people tell, and then the story will change, and then it'll fade. That's fine. Stories are supposed to change, keeps them alive longer. Clara spoke up from behind the bar. The sheriff was talking to you out there. What'd you tell him? To do his job. Think he will? Don't know, but he's got a choice now. That's more than he had this morning. The stitching continued in silence, broken only by the clink of Clara's glass and the occasional creak of settling wood. Outside, Black Hollow remained quiet, processing what it had witnessed. Boone Mercer, invincible, untouchable Boone Mercer, was dead in the street, killed by a nameless drifter who'd rode in asking for nothing and given everything. Done, Evelyn announced, tying off the final stitch. It's not pretty, but it'll hold. The stranger rolled his shoulder experimentally, feeling the pull of new thread. Good enough? Thank you. Let me bandage it proper. She wrapped clean cloth around his shoulder, securing it with knots that would have made a sailor proud. When she finished, she moved around to face him, eyes searching his face. What happens now? She asked. Now I sleep. Tomorrow I figure out what's next. And after that? After that, I leave. This isn't my town. Isn't my fight beyond tonight. You could stay, help rebuild. Make sure Boone's people don't. Evelyn. The stranger's voice was gentle but firm. I'm dying. Consumption. 6 months if I'm lucky. Staying would just mean you'd have to bury me, and that's not fair to anyone. The words hit her like cold water. She stepped back, processing. You're serious. As a hanging. But you fought like a man with nothing to lose, because that's what I am. He stood slowly, testing his balance. But tonight bought you time. Use it. Get organized. Reach out to the federal marshals. Find people willing to stand up now that there's room to stand. Build something worth keeping. Clara poured 3 more glasses of whiskey, sliding them across the bar. To the stranger who saved Black Hollow. To not dying today, the stranger countered, raising his glass. They drank together, 3 people who'd survived something that should have killed them, aware that survival was only the first step in a much longer journey. As the night deepened toward morning, the stranger climbed back upstairs to his borrowed room, shoulder throbbing with each step. He cleaned his rifle, reloaded his pistols, and sat by the window watching the street where Boone's body still lay, waiting for someone to claim it. Across the way, a light still burned in the sheriff's office. Through the window, Elias Reed sat at his desk, pen in hand, writing something with the slow deliberation of a man composing his own confession. Or maybe his own redemption. Hard to tell from this distance. The stranger watched until exhaustion finally pulled him under, dragging him into sleep that was surprisingly dreamless. For the first time in months, the ghosts that usually haunted his rest stayed quiet, as if even they recognized that tonight he'd done enough. Dawn broke over Black Hollow with the kind of hesitant light that suggested even the sun wasn't sure it wanted to witness what the day might bring. The stranger woke to pain, sharp and immediate in his shoulder, duller and more insidious in his chest where the consumption had started its slow work. He lay still for a moment, cataloging the damage, separating what would kill him today from what would kill him eventually. The shoulder would heal, assuming he lived long enough for it to matter. He sat up slowly, testing the stitches Evelyn had sewn. They held, though the surrounding flesh was angry and swollen. He'd need to keep it clean, change the bandage regularly, avoid getting shot again. The last part seemed unlikely given current circumstances, but the frontier had a way of proving assumptions wrong. Through the window, the street below showed signs of reluctant life. A few shopkeepers had emerged, standing in their doorways, staring at the dark stain where Boone's body had been. Someone had moved the corpse during the night, probably Elias, doing the grim work that came with the badge he'd neglected for so long. The blood remained, though, a reminder that wouldn't wash away with the next rain. The stranger dressed carefully, every movement sending fresh complaints through his injured shoulder. His shirt was ruined, still stiff with dried blood, but it was all he had. He shrugged into it anyway, then pulled on his duster to hide the worst of the staining. The weight of the coat felt comforting, familiar, like armor that didn't actually stop bullets, but at least maintained the illusion of protection. His rifle leaned against the wall where he'd left it. He checked it automatically, loaded, clean, ready. The borrowed Colt from Evelyn's father went into his belt, and his own revolver settled into its holster with the weight of long practice. Too many guns for a man planning to leave town, but the stranger had learned decades ago that planning and reality rarely shook hands on the frontier. Downstairs, the saloon smelled of coffee and something else. Fear, maybe, or just the lingering aftermath of violence. Clara stood behind the bar, pouring dark liquid into chipped mugs with the mechanical precision of someone who'd been up all night. She looked up when the stranger descended, eyes cataloging his condition with a single sweep. "You look like hell," she said. "Feel worse." "Coffee?" "Please." She poured, sliding the mug across the scarred wood. The stranger caught it, wrapped both hands around the warmth. The first sip burned his tongue, but settled the persistent tremor in his hands that had started about an hour after the shooting. Delayed reaction, his body finally processing what his mind had already filed away. "Elias took the body to the undertaker around 3 this morning," Clara said without preamble. "Wrote up a report. Sent his deputy. Didn't know he still had one, but apparently young Tommy Curtis has been collecting a salary for doing nothing these past 3 years. Sent Tommy writing for the federal marshal's office in Carson City. Should be back in 4, maybe 5 days with help." The stranger absorbed this information. "Elias tell you all that?" "Came by an hour ago. Looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight." Clara refilled her own mug, hands steady despite the lack of sleep. "Said he wanted to thank you. I told him you were still sleeping and he should come back later." "Why?" "Because I figured you didn't want to hear his gratitude any more than he wanted to give it. Some conversations are better avoided." She wasn't wrong. The stranger had no interest in being thanked for doing what should have been done years ago by the man wearing the badge. But he also recognized that Clara was protecting something fragile in Elias, some small ember of returning dignity that might grow into actual courage if it wasn't smothered too early. "Where's Evelyn?" he asked. "Upstairs. Finally fell asleep around dawn. Girl was watching from the window all night, making sure nobody came back." Clara's expression softened slightly. "She's young, still thinks watching can prevent things." "Can't it?" "Not the things that matter." They drank in companionable silence, two people who'd seen enough to recognize that words didn't always improve situations. Outside, Black Hollow continued its cautious awakening. More doors opened. More people emerged, blinking in the sunlight like prisoners released from cells they'd locked themselves into. The stranger finished his coffee, set down the mug. "I need to see about my horse, check his feet, make sure he's ready to travel." "You leaving today?" "Tomorrow, probably. Need to make sure things are stable first." Things won't be stable for months, maybe years. Then I need to make sure they're stable enough that my leaving doesn't collapse everything. Clara studied him with those knowing eyes. You care more than you pretend. I care the right amount, which is just enough to do what's necessary and not enough to stick around and watch it fall apart if I'm wrong. Before Clara could respond, the saloon doors banged open. Sheriff Elias Reed stood in the entrance, hat in hand, looking every bit as terrible as Clara had described. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face unshaven, his clothes rumpled like he'd slept in them. But there was something different in his posture, a straightness to his spine that hadn't been there yesterday. "Stranger," Elias said, voice hoarse. "Got a minute?" The stranger wanted to say no, wanted to walk past the sheriff and avoid whatever conversation was coming. But that would be cruel, and cruelty without purpose was just meanness. He nodded once. Elias approached slowly, as if crossing a minefield. When he reached the bar, he set his hat down carefully, fingers tracing the brim. "I wrote the report," he began, "documented everything. Boone's crimes, the people he hurt, the businesses he extorted. 3 years of evidence I'd been collecting in secret, thinking maybe someday I'd use it. Thinking maybe when Michael was safe, when I had him back, I could finally—" His voice cracked. He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. "Anyway, it's done. Sent to the marshals. Whatever happens next is out of my hands." "Good," the stranger said simply. "That's it? Just good? What do you want me to say, Sheriff? That you did the right thing? You did. That it took too long? It did. That people suffered while you gathered your courage? They did." The stranger's voice wasn't harsh, just factual. "Those are all true, and me saying them doesn't change anything." Elias flinched but held his ground. "You're right. You're completely right. I let this town rot because I was scared. Because I kept telling myself I'd act when the time was right, when I had guarantees, when I could be sure Michael would be safe." He looked up, meeting the stranger's eyes directly. "But there are no guarantees, are there? Just choices and consequences. That's all there's ever been. I know that now, learned it last night watching you face down 7 armed men like it was nothing. You weren't guaranteed to win, you just decided the fight mattered more than the odds." The stranger picked up his empty mug, examined the dregs at the bottom. "I didn't face down 7 men, Sheriff. I faced down 1. The other 6 were just set dressing. They ran the minute their boss dropped because they never believed in anything except his reputation." He set the mug down. "That's the thing about fear. It's got terrible loyalty. The second you prove it's wrong about something, it abandons ship and finds something else to be afraid of." Elias absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "So what do I do now? How do I rebuild what I let fall apart?" "Same way anything gets built. One piece at a time. You've got your report filed. Next you organize the town council, assuming you still have one, and start making a list of what needs fixing. Then you fix it. Won't be fast, won't be easy. But it's possible now in a way it wasn't yesterday." "And my son?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "What do I do about Michael?" The stranger was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "You've got 2 choices, Sheriff. You can spend your energy searching for a boy who might be dead, might be alive, might be anywhere in the territory, or you can spend it rebuilding this town so that if Michael does come home, there's something worth coming home to. Both are valid. But you can't do both, not properly. You have to choose." Elias's hands tightened on his hat brim, knuckles going white. "That's not fair." "No, it's not, but it's true anyway." "How do I choose between my son and my duty?" "You already did. 3 years ago, you chose Michael. Now you've got a chance to choose differently." The stranger's voice softened slightly. "I'm not saying abandon him. I'm saying recognize that the best thing you can do for him right now is be the father. The man you want him to remember. And that man isn't the one who hid behind fear. It's the one who stood up and reclaimed his town." Elias stood there, trembling, tears running unchecked down his weathered face. He didn't try to hide them, didn't wipe them away. He just let them fall, each one carrying a piece of the weight he'd been carrying. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," he said finally. "Nobody does until they try. That's what makes it count." Before Elias could respond, the saloon doors opened again. This time it was Thomas Morton, who ran the general store, followed by Rebecca Chen from the boarding house, and Old Man Dalton, who'd been the unofficial mayor before Boone had made official titles irrelevant. They looked nervous but determined, the kind of determination that came from watching impossible things happen and deciding maybe other impossible things could happen too. "Sheriff," Thomas began, addressing Elias with a formality that had been absent for years. "We'd like to discuss organizing a town meeting, figure out next steps, make sure what the stranger did last night wasn't for nothing." Elias straightened, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "That's a good idea, Thomas. Real good. When were you thinking? Tonight? After supper? Give folks time to work up their nerve." "Tonight works." Elias looked at the stranger. "You'll be there?" "No. But you don't need me. You need to remember how to stand on your own. I'm already a crutch you're leaning on, and crutches are supposed to be temporary." Rebecca spoke up, her accent carrying traces of her Chinese heritage mixed with frontier hardness. "At least tell us your name so we can thank you proper." The stranger shook his head. "Names don't matter. What matters is what you do next. You want to thank me? Make sure this town is still standing a year from now without needing someone to ride in and save it." "But no buts. I'm nobody. Just a dying man who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Give that story to your children and make sure they understand the important part wasn't me. It was all of you deciding you'd had enough." The group exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond to someone who refused to be made into a hero. Finally, Old Man Dalton, who'd seen enough years to recognize when arguing was pointless, nodded slowly. "Fair enough, stranger, but you should know something. You gave us more than just freedom from Boone. You gave us proof that it's possible. And sometimes proof is the only thing that stands between surrender and resistance." The stranger didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish what Dalton had just articulated. Instead, he simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement between two men who understood that sometimes silence carried more weight than words. The group left, already talking among themselves, planning, organizing. The energy in their voices was tentative but real, the first green shoots pushing through scorched earth, fragile but determined. Whether those shoots would survive depended on 1,000 factors the stranger couldn't control, but at least now they had a chance. Elias lingered, hat still in hand, clearly wanting to say something more. The stranger waited, not helping, letting the sheriff find his own words. "I'm going to search for him," Elias said finally. "My son. But not now. Not yet. First, I'm going to make sure this town can stand without me for however long it takes, and if I don't find him, if he's already gone—" He stopped, breathed deep, continued. "Then at least I'll have done something that mattered, something he could be proud of, if he's watching." "That's as good a plan as any," the stranger said. "Will you at least tell me one thing, your real reason for doing this? Not the redemption story, not the dying man angle, the real reason." The stranger considered refusing, then decided honesty was the least he owed a man trying to climb out of his own grave. "Because I'm tired of being angry, at myself, at the world, at every choice I didn't make when I should have. And I figured maybe, just maybe, doing one thing right before I die might make the anger quiet down enough for me to have some peace at the end." "Did it work?" "Don't know yet. Ask me again when I'm dying." Elias smiled, a sad, knowing expression that spoke to shared understanding of regret's weight. "Fair enough." He put his hat back on, adjusting it to sit properly. "Thank you, stranger, for everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this town is still free a year from now." "I will. I promise." Elias left, walking with the kind of purpose that suggested he'd found something he'd lost. Not his son, not yet, but himself. The stranger watched him go, then turned to find Clara refilling his coffee without being asked. "That was kind," she said. "What you told him. That was practical. Kind would have been lying to make him feel better." Sometimes the practical thing and the kind thing are the same. The stranger accepted the coffee, wrapping his hands around the mug again. The tremor had returned, faint but persistent. "How long you been running this place?" 15 years. Came out west after my husband died in the war. Figured I'd seen enough death in the east, might as well see what the west had to offer. Turned out to be more of the same, just with different scenery. "You ever think about leaving?" Clara laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Every day for the first 5 years. Then I realized I'd put down roots without noticing. This place isn't home exactly, but it's where I am. That's close enough." "Even under Boone?" especially under Boone. Someone had to maintain some kind of normalcy, even if it was just serving drinks and pretending everything was fine. People need that, need a place where the pretending is allowed. The stranger understood that more than he wanted to admit. How many saloons had he sat in over the past decade, pretending his life had direction, pretending the next town would be different, pretending purpose was waiting just over the next horizon? "You think they'll make it?" he asked. "This town?" "Honestly, I give it 50-50 odds. They've got momentum now, riding the high of watching you kill Boone. But momentum fades. In a month, maybe two, when the reality of rebuilding sets in, when the hard work isn't exciting anymore, when some of Boone's old crew comes sniffing around looking for revenge, that's when we'll see what they're really made of. And if they fail, then Black Hollow becomes another dead town on a dead frontier. Won't be the first, won't be the last." Clara topped off her own coffee. "But at least they'll have tried. That's more than they've done in 3 years." Footsteps on the stairs announced Evelyn's arrival. She looked better than she had last night, rested, cleaned up, wearing a fresh dress that somehow made her look younger and older at the same time. Her eyes went immediately to the stranger, scanning him for damage. "You're up," she said. "Hard to sleep through all this conversation. How's the shoulder?" "Sore, but functional." She moved behind the bar, helping herself to coffee with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "I heard voices, people talking about a town meeting." "They're organizing," Claire said, "trying to figure out what comes next." "That's good, right?" "It's a start." Evelyn turned to the stranger. "And you? What comes next for you?" "I check my horse, make sure the town is stable enough to stand without me, then ride out. Probably tomorrow, maybe the day after." Something flickered across Evelyn's face. Disappointment, maybe, or the particular sadness that came from watching someone choose to leave. "You could stay. Help them rebuild properly." "I could, but I won't. This isn't my town to rebuild." "It could be." The stranger shook his head. "I'm dying, Evelyn. Consumption. Every day I wake up is borrowed time. Staying would just mean you'd have to bury me, and I'd rather spare you that." "We'd bury you anyway if you stay. But at least we'd have more time with you first. More time to learn, to get stronger. You're already stronger than you think. You just haven't tested it yet." He set down his coffee mug. "I'm not what you need. What you need is to believe in yourselves enough to handle whatever comes next. And you can't do that if you're looking to me for answers." Evelyn's jaw tightened, frustration warring with understanding. "So that's it? You ride in, turn everything upside down, and just leave?" "That's exactly it." "That's not fair. Already told your sheriff the same thing this morning. Fair doesn't live here anymore. Maybe it never did. But what is fair about any of this? Fair would be Boone never showing up in the first place. Fair would be your father staying to fight instead of running. Fair would be me not getting consumption so I could stick around and see this through properly." The stranger's voice softened. "But we don't get fair. We get what we get, and we make the best of it." Evelyn stared at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. Then she turned abruptly and headed for the back room, shoulders stiff with the kind of anger that came from knowing someone was right, but hating them for it anyway. Clara watched her go, then looked at the stranger. "You could have been gentler." Gentle doesn't prepare people for hard truths. And the truth is, I can't stay, so getting attached to the idea that I will just makes the leaving harder. "For her or for you?" The stranger didn't answer. The question was too accurate to deflect and too complicated to address honestly. Instead, he pushed back from the bar and headed for the doors. Outside, the morning had settled into the kind of heat that baked thought from your head if you let it. The stranger walked down the main street, noting the changes. People were actually outside now, talking in small groups, making eye contact. A few even nodded to him as he passed, cautious acknowledgments that something had shifted in the town's foundation. The livery stable stood at the end of the street, a weathered structure that smelled of hay and horse sweat and old leather. Inside, his horse waited in a stall, looking no worse for the journey. The stranger ran his hands over the animal's legs, checking for heat or swelling, examining each hoof for stones or cracks. "He's a good horse," a voice said from behind. The stranger turned to find a young man, couldn't be more than 20, standing in the stable doorway. He wore simple clothes and had the kind of calloused hands that came from working with animals. "You the stable hand?" the stranger asked. "Tommy Curtis. Also the deputy, apparently. though I've mostly been shoveling manure for 3 years while pretending to patrol. Tommy stepped closer, uncertain but determined. Sheriff sent me riding this morning, to the marshal's office. First real deputy work I've done since Boone arrived. How'd it feel? Terrifying, also good. Like maybe I could actually be what the badge says I am. The stranger went back to checking his horse. You were too young when Boone took over. Can't blame yourself for not standing up when grown men couldn't. I'm not too young now. No, you're not. Tommy moved to the next stall, starting his own work with practiced efficiency. People are saying you're leaving soon. People are right. That seems wrong. You just saved this town. Shouldn't you stay and make sure it sticks? I saved this town from one man. But towns don't survive because of one man. They survive because enough people decide survival matters. That decision has to come from inside, not from some stranger passing through. But what if we're not ready? What if Boone's people come back and we can't? Then you handle it, or you don't. But either way, it's yours to handle, not mine. The stranger straightened, satisfied the horse was sound. You want advice? Yes, sir. Stop looking for someone to save you. Start figuring out how to save yourself. Practice with your gun. Learn to read situations before they turn violent. Build relationships with the people in this town so they trust you enough to follow when things get hard. Do the work, even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. Tommy absorbed this, nodding slowly. That's what Sheriff Reed said too, this morning before I left. He said the time for hiding was done, and anyone wearing a badge needed to earn it again. Smart man, your sheriff, when he bothers to be. You think he can do it? Actually rebuild? The stranger considered the question honestly. I think he wants to. Whether wanting is enough depends on 1,000 factors I can't predict. But wanting is where it starts, so he's ahead of where he was yesterday. They worked in companionable silence for a while, Tommy mucking stalls while the stranger brushed down his horse. The rhythm of the work was soothing, familiar, the kind of mindless physical labor that let thoughts settle into order. Can I ask you something? Tommy said eventually. Can't stop you. Why'd you really do it? Face down Boone like that when you had no stake in this town? The stranger had answered this question more times in the past 12 hours than he cared to count, but each person asking deserved their own answer. Because I was already dead. The consumption's going to kill me in a few months whether I fight or not. Figured I'd rather die standing up than waste away lying down. That's not the whole reason, though, is it? No, it's not. What's the rest? The stranger was quiet for a long moment, brush moving in long strokes along his horse's flank. 10 years ago, I let someone die because I was being careful, being smart, waiting for the right moment. And she died anyway, and I lived, and I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to balance that scale. He paused. Yesterday, I saw a woman in the street, tied up and humiliated. And I saw that same choice staring at me again. Wait and be smart, or act and risk everything. This time, I chose different. Did it balance the scale? No, nothing balances that scale. But at least this time I can look at myself in the mirror without wanting to put my fist through it. Tommy didn't respond immediately, processing what he'd been told. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. My father used to say the hardest thing about being a good man was knowing when to be hard and when to be soft. Said too much of either one turned you into something you'd hate. Your father sounds wise. He was. Got killed by Boone's men 2 years ago for refusing to pay protection money. They made it look like an accident, horse trampling, but everyone knew. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died standing up. That's worth something. Tommy straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. That's why I asked about you. Wondered if maybe you were doing the same thing, choosing how to die instead of letting it choose you. The stranger smiled, a genuine expression that held real warmth. You're smarter than you look, Deputy Curtis. I hide it well. They finished their work in silence, two men who understood that sometimes the best conversations were the ones that didn't need filling. When the stranger finally led his horse out into the sunlight, Tommy followed him to the stable entrance. Good luck out there, Tommy said. Wherever you're heading. Good luck here. You'll need it more than I will. The stranger led his horse back toward the saloon, aware of eyes tracking his movement from windows and doorways. Black Hollow was watching, still uncertain, still scared, but beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. He was tying his horse to the hitching post outside the saloon when he heard the distant sound of approaching riders. Not many, 3, maybe 4, but moving with purpose. The stranger's hand dropped instinctively to his pistol as he turned to face the sound. They appeared at the end of the street moments later, dust billowing behind them. 4 men, all armed, all wearing the kind of hard expressions that came from lives spent outside the law. They pulled up in the middle of the street, scanning the buildings with professional caution. The lead rider was older than the others, somewhere past 50, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left in the sun too long. He wore a duster similar to the stranger's and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from surviving things that should have killed him. "This Black Hollow?" the lead rider called out. The stranger didn't answer immediately, studying the group. They didn't have the feel of Boone's people, wrong energy, wrong posture. But they weren't lawmen either, something in between which made them potentially more dangerous than either. "Depends who's asking," the stranger finally replied. The lead rider's eyes found him, assessed him in a single sweep that cataloged weapons, stance, and probable threat level. "Name's Jacob Halloway. These are my associates. We're looking for Boone Mercer. Heard he runs things here." The name hit the stranger like cold water. Jacob Halloway, the man from Redemption Creek. The man who'd walked free after Sarah Merriweather died. The man who'd started the stranger down this path of guilt and violence and eventual consumption. Jacob didn't recognize him, which made sense. 10 years and a lot of hard living had changed the stranger's face enough that even people who'd known him well would struggle to place him. But the stranger recognized Jacob in every detail, from the scar over his left eye to the particular way he sat his horse. "Boone's dead," the stranger said, voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Died last night." Jacob's expression didn't change. "How?" "I killed him." "You?" Jacob studied him more carefully now, reassessing. "Just you?" "Just me." "That's so." Jacob dismounted slowly, hands visible and away from his weapons. "Mind if I ask why?" "He was terrorizing this town. I stopped him." "Noble. Also stupid. Boone had friends, people who don't take kindly to having their business partners killed. Then those people should have chosen better partners." Jacob smiled, the same cold, empty smile the stranger remembered from a courtroom 10 years ago. "Fair point, but here's the thing, friend. Boone wasn't just some independent operator. He was part of a larger organization, my organization. And when someone kills one of my people, I take that personally." The stranger's hand moved closer to his pistol. "Then I guess you've got a problem." "We both do." Jacob gestured to his companions, who dismounted and spread out in a loose formation. "See, I can't just let you walk away from this. Bad for business. Sets a precedent. But I'm not an unreasonable man. You tell me who hired you, who's backing your play, and maybe we can work something out." "Nobody hired me. Nobody's backing me. I saw wrong and corrected it." "Nobody does that anymore. Not in this territory, not without reason." The stranger met Jacob's eyes directly, making a decision that felt inevitable. "I do. And I've got more reason than you know." Something in his voice must have registered because Jacob's smile faded slightly. "Do I know you?" "You should, but you won't. Men like you never remember the people you destroy. Too many to keep track of." Jacob's hand moved toward his pistol, casual but deliberate. "That sounds like the setup to something violent." "Could be." They stared at each other across the dusty street, tension building like pressure before a storm. Behind the stranger, he heard the saloon doors open. Footsteps on the boardwalk. Then Elias Reed's voice, strong and clear in a way it hadn't been in years. "That's far enough, gentlemen. This town's had enough violence for 1 week." Jacob didn't look away from the stranger. "Sheriff, I presume?" "That's right. Sheriff Elias Reed. And I'm telling you officially that you and your men need to mount up and ride out. Black Hollow's closed to your kind of business." "My kind of business was already here, Sheriff. Boone was one of mine, which means his territory is mine, which means you work for me now, whether you like it or not." "Boone's dead. His territory died with him." "See, that's where you're wrong." Jacob finally turned to look at Elias, expression tolerant and dangerous. "Territory doesn't die. It just changes hands, and I'm here to claim what's mine." The stranger felt the moment crystallize, the choice forming with perfect clarity. He could walk away. Let Elias handle this. stick to his plan of leaving tomorrow and let Black Hollow fight its own battles. Or he could finish what he'd started 10 years ago in a courtroom in Redemption Creek. The consumption in his chest chose that moment to flare, a sharp reminder that his time was borrowed anyway. The stranger smiled, decision made. "Jacob Halloway," he said quietly. Jacob turned back to him. "What?" 10 years ago, Redemption Creek. You had a protection racket there too. Got arrested for burning down a bakery with a man inside. Killed his daughter when she refused your advances." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "I was acquitted of those charges." "You were. Because the deputy marshal who arrested you made procedural mistakes that let your lawyers get the evidence thrown out. That deputy's name was William Drake, and he's been carrying the weight of those mistakes ever since." Recognition dawned slowly on Jacob's face, followed by something like amusement. "Drake? I'll be damned. You're still alive?" "For now." "You look terrible. What happened to you?" "I stopped compromising with men like you." Jacob laughed, genuine surprise mixed with genuine cruelty. "Is that what this is? A revenge play? You rode into Black Hollow looking for me?" "No, I rode into Black Hollow looking for a grave. Finding you here is just fortune smiling for once." "Fortune's got a twisted sense of humor then, because you're about to get your grave, Drake. Just maybe not the way you planned." The four men with Jacob had their hands on their weapons now, waiting for the signal. Elias stood on the boardwalk, rifle in hand, looking scared but resolved. From windows and doorways, the stranger could feel Black Hollow watching, breath held, waiting to see if yesterday's miracle would repeat or if reality would finally reassert itself. "Last chance," Jacob said. "Walk away. Right now. I'll let you go. Hell, I'll even respect it. Man knows when he's beaten. That's wisdom." The stranger's hand settled on his pistol grip. "Never did have much wisdom." "Your funeral." Everything happened at once. Jacob and his men drew fast, practiced, the kind of synchronized movement that spoke to training and experience. But the stranger had been ready since Jacob's name left his lips, and his pistol cleared leather while theirs were still rising. His first shot took the man on Jacob's left, catching him in the chest before his gun leveled. His second shot clipped Jacob's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Elias's rifle cracked from the boardwalk, dropping another of Jacob's men. Return fire filled the air with lead and thunder. The stranger felt something burn across his ribs, a graze that hurt but didn't slow him. He fired again, missing in the chaos, then dove behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood behind him. From somewhere to his right, another gun joined the fight. The stranger risked a glance and saw Tommy Curtis, the young deputy, firing from behind the livery stable entrance. His shots were wild but enthusiastic, adding enough chaos to disrupt Jacob's remaining men. The stranger rolled left, came up shooting. His bullet found the third of Jacob's companions, sending him stumbling backward with a cry. That left just Jacob, wounded but still fighting, pistol tracking toward Elias. The stranger fired without thinking, muscle memory taking over. His bullet caught Jacob in the side, punching through and dropping him hard. Jacob hit the ground, blood spreading dark across his shirt, pistol falling from nerveless fingers. Then silence. The kind of profound quiet that came after violence, when ears rang and smoke drifted and reality slowly reasserted itself. The stranger straightened, checking for damage. The graze across his ribs was bleeding but superficial. His shoulder, the one Evelyn had stitched, had torn open again, fresh blood soaking through the bandage. But he was standing, which was more than Jacob could say. He walked to where Jacob lay, pistol still ready. Jacob looked up at him, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth, eyes starting to glaze. "Should have walked away," Jacob managed. "Should have, but didn't. That's been my problem all along." "Sarah Merriweather," Jacob whispered. "She wasn't the first, won't be the last." "She's the last one you'll ever touch," Jacob smiled, blood-stained and fading. "Doesn't change anything. Men like me, there's always more. Maybe, but not you. Not anymore." Jacob's eyes lost focus, breath rattling once before stopping. The stranger stood over him, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no sense of scales balanced, just exhaustion and the persistent burn of consumption in his chest. Elias approached carefully, rifle still ready. "You knew him." "Yeah, From before. Yeah. This why you really came to Black Hollow? The stranger shook his head. No. This was just fortune being less cruel than usual, giving me a chance to close one door before the last one shuts. Tommy Curtis emerged from the livery, gun lowered, face pale. Did that really? You did good, Deputy, Elias said. Real good. Kept your head, supported your town. Your father would be proud. Tommy looked at the bodies in the street, processing what he'd done. The stranger recognized the expression, the moment when theory became practice and practice became blood. The kid would either grow from this or break. No way to know which until time passed. Clara appeared in the saloon doorway, Evelyn beside her. Both women scanned the scene, cataloging who was standing and who wasn't. You're bleeding again, Evelyn said, voice tight. Notice that. Inside. Now. Before you bleed out in the street like some kind of dramatic idiot. The stranger found himself smiling despite everything. Yes, ma'am. He let her lead him back into the saloon, leaving Elias and Tommy to handle the aftermath. Behind him, Black Hollow began emerging from hiding again, people stepping into the street with the kind of cautious hope that suggested maybe, just maybe, they were starting to believe. Inside the saloon, Evelyn set to work on his wounds with practiced deficiency born from recent experience. The shoulder needed restitching, which she did without flinching. The rib graze she cleaned and bandaged tight. Through it all, the stranger sat quietly, letting the pain ground him in the present. That man, Evelyn said as she worked. Jacob, you knew him from before. Yeah. He was why you stopped being a lawman. Part of it. And now he's dead. He is. Does it help? Does killing him make the guilt less? The stranger thought about lying, then decided she deserved truth. No. But at least now he can't hurt anyone else. That's something. Is it enough? It'll have to be. Evelyn tied off the last bandage, hands gentle despite the hard words. You're going to die here, aren't you? Not tomorrow, not riding out. You're going to stay until the consumption takes you. No, I'm leaving tomorrow like I planned. Why? You just proved this town needs you. This town needs to stand on its own. And I need, he paused, searching for words, I need to see one more sunrise from someplace new. Need to die somewhere that isn't carrying all this weight. That's running. Maybe, but it's my run, and I've earned it. Evelyn didn't argue further. She cleaned her hands, put away the medical supplies, then sat across from him with eyes that were too old for her face. When you go, she said quietly, I'm coming with you. The stranger blinked. What? You heard me? I'm coming with you. Not forever, just until you find that sunrise you're looking for, until the consumption takes you, until you're not alone anymore. Evelyn, don't tell me it's not safe. Don't tell me I should stay here and rebuild. Don't tell me you need to be alone. Her voice was steady, certain. You gave this town its courage back. The least I can do is make sure you don't die alone in some forgotten boarding house, coughing blood with nobody to care. The stranger wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the reasons this was a bad idea. But looking at her face, seeing the determination there, he recognized something he'd seen in his own mirror once. The need to do something that mattered, even if it was small, even if nobody else understood. It won't be easy, he warned. The dying. It won't be clean or quick. I know. And when it's over, you'll be alone in whatever territory we land in. I'll manage. I've managed worse. The stranger sat back, studying her. Why? Because you're the first person who ever stood up for me without expecting something in return. Because I watched you risk everything for a town you don't even belong to. Because, she paused, choosing words carefully, because someone should bear witness to who you were, to what you did. So it doesn't just disappear like it never mattered. The stranger felt something crack in his chest. Not the consumption, but something older, harder. The armor he'd built around himself against connections and care. Tomorrow, he said finally. We leave at dawn. Evelyn smiled, genuine and warm. Tomorrow at dawn. Outside, the sounds of Black Hollow reorganizing itself drifted through the windows. Voices raised in planning, in hope, in the first tentative steps toward rebuilding what fear had torn down. The stranger listened to it for a moment, then closed his eyes, letting exhaustion finally claim him. Tomorrow they'd ride. Tonight, he'd rest. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The stranger woke to darkness and the sound of his own coughing. It started small, just a tickle in his throat, that grew into something wet and violent. He rolled to his side, muffling the sound in his pillow, tasting copper on his tongue. When it finally subsided, he sat up slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Even in the dim moonlight filtering through the window, he could see the dark stain. Blood. Not much, but enough to confirm what he already knew. The consumption was accelerating. He stood carefully, moving to the wash basin. The water was cold, left over from yesterday, but it did its job. He cleaned his face, rinsed his mouth, and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the basin. The man looking back was a stranger to the one who'd worn a badge in Redemption Creek a decade ago. Thinner, harder, with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten how to look away. How much time did he have left? Weeks, maybe. A month if he was lucky and didn't push too hard. The doctor in Denver had given him 6 months 4 months ago, but doctors always padded their estimates, trying to be kind. The stranger had seen enough death to read his own approaching end. Tomorrow he'd ride out with Evelyn, find some quiet place with a decent view. Maybe the mountains, where the air was clean and the sky went on forever. Die there with at least one person to mark his passing. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than most men got. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "You awake?" Evelyn's voice, quiet through the door. "Yeah." She entered carrying a lamp turned low, its weak light carving shadows across her face. She'd heard the coughing. Of course she had. These walls were thin, and the saloon quiet at this hour. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough." She set the lamp on the table, examining him with the kind of clinical distance she'd developed over the past day. "You should rest. Save your strength for tomorrow." "Can't sleep anyway." "Then sit. I'll make tea. Clara keeps some in the kitchen for nights when the whiskey isn't enough." She disappeared before he could argue, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the persistent ache in his chest. He sat on the edge of the bed, testing his breathing. Shallow was better than deep. Deep brought the coughing back. Evelyn returned with 2 steaming cups that smelled of mint and something else he couldn't identify. She handed him one and settled into the broken chair, tucking her legs beneath her. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Keeps replaying in my head, the shooting, the bodies, Jacob's face when he realized you were going to kill him." She sipped her tea, grimacing at the heat. "Does it ever stop? The replaying?" "No, but it gets quieter. Background noise instead of shouting." "How long does that take?" "Depends on the person. Could be months, could be years, could be never." Evelyn absorbed this without comment, staring into her cup like it held answers it didn't. Outside, Black Hollow slept the uneasy sleep of a town that had survived but wasn't yet sure what survival meant. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said suddenly. "Sarah Merriweather, the girl Jacob killed." The stranger was quiet for a long moment, deciding whether to refuse. But something about the hour, the darkness, the intimacy of shared insomnia made honesty easier than deflection. She was 16, bright, had this laugh that sounded like music, the kind that made everyone around her smile without knowing why. Her father ran a bakery, made the best bread I'd ever tasted. She worked the counter, always had flour on her apron, always had time to talk to customers, even when she was busy. He paused, remembering. Jacob wanted her. Started showing up at the bakery every day, making conversation, bringing gifts. She was polite at first, then firm when he didn't take the hint. Then scared when firm didn't work. Her father came to me, said Jacob was making threats, said his daughter was afraid to walk home alone. "What did you do?" "Talked to Jacob, warned him to back off. He smiled and said he didn't know what I was talking about, that he was just a customer who appreciated good bread." The stranger's hands tightened on his cup. "I should have arrested him then. Should have found something to charge him with, anything to get him away from Sarah. But I was playing by the rules, waiting for evidence I could use in court. And then the fire. They burned the bakery at night when it was closed. Should have been empty. But Sarah's father had started sleeping there after the threats, guarding his livelihood. The flames trapped him on the 2nd floor. By the time we got there, the whole building was gone." Evelyn's face had gone pale. "And Sarah?" Found her 3 days later. Jacob had grabbed her during the confusion of the fire, taken her to a mining camp outside town, used her, broke her, then killed her when she tried to escape. His voice remained steady, but his eyes betrayed the depth of his guilt. I arrested Jacob the next morning. Had witnesses who saw his men near the bakery before the fire. Had evidence linking him to the mining camp. Built what I thought was an airtight case. But his lawyers got him off. They did. Because I'd searched the mining camp without a proper warrant. Because I'd threatened one of his men to get testimony. Because I'd let my anger compromise my procedure, and the judge had no choice but to throw out the evidence. The stranger set down his tea, afraid he'd crush the cup. Jacob walked free, moved to the next territory, started the same racket somewhere else, and I turned in my badge because I couldn't look at it anymore without seeing Sarah's face. They sat in silence, two people carrying different weights that felt equally heavy in the darkness. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? You didn't kill her, Jacob did. I let it happen. I had chances to stop it and chose procedure over protection. That's on me. You were following the law. The law got a 16-year-old girl killed. Forgive me if I stopped trusting it after that." Evelyn leaned forward, setting her own cup aside. "So you've spent 10 years punishing yourself, drifting, drinking, taking stupid risks, and now you're dying, and you still think you deserve it. Don't I?" "No, you made a mistake, a terrible one, yes, but a mistake, and you've been trying to correct it ever since. Every town you've ridden through, every wrong you've tried to right. At some point, you have to forgive yourself." The stranger laughed bitterly. "That's where you're wrong. I don't have to forgive myself. I just have to keep moving until the consumption catches up and makes the question irrelevant. That's not living. That's just waiting to die. What do you think I've been doing for 10 years? The question hung between them, heavy with truth. Evelyn stared at him, and he saw tears forming in her eyes, not for herself, but for him, for the waste of it all. "When we leave tomorrow," she said quietly, "we're not going to find you somewhere to die. We're going to find you somewhere to live. However long you've got left, you're going to spend it living, not waiting." "Evelyn, I mean it. You gave this town its courage back. The least you can do is find some of your own." Before he could respond, voices erupted in the street below. Angry voices, multiple people, the kind of commotion that meant trouble had arrived wearing familiar clothes. The stranger moved to the window, ignoring the protest from his injuries. Below, Sheriff Elias Reed stood in the middle of the street, facing down a group of townspeople, maybe 15 of them, carrying torches and weapons, led by a man the stranger recognized as Marcus Webb, who owned the grain mill on the edge of town. "This is your fault, Elias," Marcus shouted, torch held high. "You let that stranger kill Boone, and now Jacob's dead too, and word's going to spread that Black Hollow is fair game. We'll have every outlaw in the territory coming here looking for reputation." "That's not how it works," Elias said, voice steady despite being outnumbered. "Boone's dead. Jacob's dead. That sends a message that we're not easy prey anymore. It sends a message that we're stupid, that we'll fight when we should negotiate. Boone had rules, at least. We knew where we stood. Now we've got nothing but uncertainty and dead bodies." The stranger watched, reading the crowd's body language. This wasn't a mob, not yet, but it could become one fast. Fear did that. Took reasonable people and turned them into something ugly when they felt cornered. Tommy Curtis stood beside Elias, rifle in hand, looking scared but determined. Claire had emerged from the saloon, positioning herself on the boardwalk with a shotgun cradled in her arms, not aiming at anyone, just present, making it clear where she stood. "We should go down there," Evelyn said from beside him. "No, this is Elias's fight. He needs to win it himself or it doesn't count. But if it turns violent, then we step in, but not before. He has to prove to them, and himself, that he can lead without someone holding his hand." They watched as Elias stepped forward, hands raised in a calming gesture that looked more confident than he probably felt. "I understand you're scared," Elias said, addressing the whole group. "I've been scared for 3 years, scared of Boone, scared of losing my son, scared of making the wrong choice and getting people killed. But you know what I learned yesterday? Fear doesn't protect you. It just makes you slower to act when action matters. Easy to say when you've got a stranger backing your play, Marcus shot back. What happens when he leaves? When the next Jacob Holloway rides in looking for revenge? Then we handle it together, the way towns are supposed to. Elias gestured at the people around him. We've got a sheriff's office. We've got deputies. We've got citizens who can learn to defend themselves. We've got everything we need except the will to use it. You're asking us to risk our lives. I'm asking you to live them. There's a difference. Elias's voice hardened. For 3 years, we've been corpses pretending to breathe, going through motions, hiding, compromising. And where did it get us? Boone took more every month. Jacob would have taken even more. At what point were we going to say enough? A woman near the back of the crowd spoke up. Margaret Chen, Rebecca's sister, who ran the dress shop. My husband died last year. Boone's men said it was an accident, that he fell drunk and hit his head. But he didn't drink. Everyone knew. And nobody said anything because we were all too scared. Her voice cracked. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of pretending. If the stranger showed us anything, it's that standing up is possible. Standing up gets you killed, Marcus argued, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. So does kneeling, Margaret replied, just slower, and with less dignity. The crowd shifted, uncertainty rippling through them. The stranger could see the moment crystallizing, the point where they'd either commit to Elias's vision or retreat back into fear. It could go either way. Then Tommy Curtis stepped forward, young voice carrying clearly in the night air. My father died standing up, refused to pay Boone protection money, and they killed him for it. I was 17, too scared to do anything about it. Wore a badge for 3 years and never once acted like I deserved it. He looked at Marcus directly. Yesterday I shot a man, one of Jacob's crew. First time I've ever killed anyone. And you know what I felt afterward? Not guilt, not fear. Relief. Relief that finally, I'd done something that mattered. You're a child, Marcus said, but the words lacked conviction. I'm 19. Same age my father was when he started his business. Same age you were when you built your mill, Mr. Webb. We're not children. We're just people who've forgotten how to stand. The stranger felt something unexpected. Pride. The kid had grown about a decade in 2 days, found something inside himself worth building on. Whether it lasted remained to be seen, but right now, in this moment, Tommy Curtis was exactly what Black Hollow needed. Elias seized the momentum. Town meeting, tomorrow night. We'll discuss protection, organization, how to handle threats when they come. Everyone gets a voice, everyone gets a vote. But hiding behind fear, that option's off the table. We tried it for 3 years and it nearly killed us all. The crowd wavered, then slowly began to disperse. Not in agreement necessarily, but in exhaustion. It was late, emotions were high, and morning would bring clearer heads. Marcus Webb stood his ground for a moment longer, then turned and walked away, torch still burning, shoulders hunched with the weight of a losing argument. When the street finally cleared, Elias looked up at the window where the stranger stood. He couldn't see clearly in the darkness, but he knew someone was watching. He nodded once, a gesture of thanks, or acknowledgement, or maybe just weary recognition that the hard work was only beginning. The stranger nodded back, then turned from the window. See, Evelyn said, he didn't need you. He did. Just not this way you think. He needed to know someone believed he could do it. That's different from actually doing it for him. And tomorrow, when we leave, what happens when he doesn't have that anymore? Then he either finds it inside himself or doesn't. But that's his choice to make, not mine to force. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then moved toward the door. Try to sleep. We've got a long ride ahead. Evelyn. She paused, hand on the door frame. Thank you, the stranger said, for coming, for caring, for not letting me die alone in some corner. Nobody will remember. She smiled, sad, but genuine. Thank you for showing me what standing up looks like, even if it scares me. She left, closing the door softly. The stranger returned to his bed, lying down carefully to avoid jostling his injuries. Sleep didn't come immediately, but eventually exhaustion won over pain and worry, dragging him under into dreams that were surprisingly gentle. He woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Clara had left a tray outside his door, bread, cheese, and a steaming mug that suggested she knew about the early departure. The stranger ate mechanically, fueling his body for the journey ahead, then gathered his meager possessions. Rifle, pistols, ammunition, a change of clothes that was barely cleaner than what he wore. Not much to show for 40-some years of living, but it was enough. Downstairs, Evelyn waited with a packed bag of her own. She'd dressed practically, riding clothes, sturdy boots, her father's pistol tucked into her belt. Her hair was pulled back, and her face carried the determined expression of someone who'd made a decision and refused to second-guess it. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." Clara stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical attention of someone keeping their hands busy to avoid showing emotion. "Take care of each other out there." "We will," Evelyn promised. "And stranger," Clara looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "What you did here mattered. Don't let whatever time you've got left convince you otherwise." The stranger nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd spent 10 years believing nothing he did mattered, that every action was just noise before silence. Having someone state the opposite so plainly felt like absolution he didn't deserve, but desperately wanted. They walked to the livery where Tommy had already prepared the stranger's horse and saddled a second mount for Evelyn, a sturdy mare that wouldn't win races but would cover ground reliably. The young deputy stood beside the horses, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "You'll do fine," the stranger said, saving him the trouble. "You don't know that." "I do, because you care. That's half the battle right there." "What's the other half?" "Showing up. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Tommy nodded, absorbing this. "Where will you go?" "North. Maybe the mountains. Somewhere with clean air and a decent view." "Will you come back? After you're feeling better?" The stranger appreciated the lie, the kindness of pretending recovery was possible. "No, but that's all right. This was never my town. I was just passing through." "You saved it." "No. I gave it a chance to save itself. There's a difference." Elias appeared at the stable entrance, looking better than he had in days despite the lack of sleep. The weight he'd carried seemed lighter, or maybe he'd just gotten stronger carrying it. "Heading out?" Elias asked. "Yeah." "Can't convince you to stay? Town could use a man like you." "Town's got a man like me. He's wearing your badge." Elias smiled ruefully. "Not sure I measure up to that comparison." "You will. Give it time." They shook hands, a firm grip that carried mutual respect earned through shared violence and harder truths. Then Elias turned to Evelyn. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I'm sure." "Your father, if he comes back and you're gone, then you tell him I made my own choice, same as he did when he left." Evelyn's voice was steady. "I'm not abandoning Black Hollow. I'm just taking a different path for a while." Elias didn't argue further. He helped her mount, checked her stirrups and saddle with the practiced attention of someone who knew horses. When he stepped back, his face carried the particular sadness of watching someone leave who might not return. The stranger mounted his own horse, settling into the familiar ache of leather and motion. His shoulder protested, his ribs complained, and his chest burned with every breath. But he was upright, moving, choosing his direction. That counted for something. They rode slowly through Black Hollow's main street, giving the town a chance for farewells. People emerged from buildings, watching silently. Some waved, others just stared. A few, like Margaret Chen, pressed hands to hearts in gestures that spoke volumes without words. At the edge of town, the stranger turned back for one last look. Black Hollow sat there in the morning sun, shabby and worn but alive in a way it hadn't been when he'd arrived. Smoke rose from chimneys, people moved with purpose. The town breathed. Whatever came next would be up to them, but at least they had a chance. They rode north into country that grew rougher and more beautiful with each mile. The desert scrub gave way to rolling hills, then foothills that promised mountains beyond. The stranger set a measured pace, conserving his strength, while Evelyn rode beside him in comfortable silence. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Evelyn had packed supplies from Clara's kitchen, dried meat, hard bread, a canteen of water that tasted faintly of minerals. They sat in the shade of a scraggly tree that had somehow survived in this harsh landscape, watching the horizon shimmer with heat. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said eventually. "Can't stop you. When we find the place you want to die, what then? What happens after?" The stranger considered the question. You bury me somewhere with a view. Mark the grave so you can find it if you ever want to visit. Then you go wherever you want. Live whatever life you choose, preferably one that doesn't involve waiting for the next disaster. That's it? No final words? No great wisdom to pass on? I'm fresh out of wisdom. Just got stubbornness and regret, and those aren't worth passing anywhere. Evelyn pulled her knees to her chest, staring at nothing. My mother died when I was 8. Fever took her in 3 days. She spent the last night telling me stories, fairy tales about princesses and heroes and happy endings. When she got too weak to talk, she just held my hand. And then she was gone. I'm sorry. Don't be. Point is, when my father left, he didn't say goodbye. Just disappeared one morning while I was sleeping. Left a note saying he couldn't take it anymore, that he was sorry, that he hoped I'd understand. But I didn't understand. Still don't. How do you love someone and just vanish on them? The stranger heard the question beneath the question. I'm not your father, Evelyn. I'm telling you straight what's coming. No surprises, no vanishing. When it's time, you'll be there. That's the deal. Promise? Promise. They sat in silence, watching the wind push dust devils across the empty land. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled, hunting, life continuing its patterns regardless of human drama. Tell me about the mountains, Evelyn said. The place we're going. The stranger closed his eyes, picturing it from memory of other journeys. There's a range about 3 days north, not the biggest peaks, but respectable. Pine trees grow thick enough to block the sun. There's streams with water so cold it hurts your teeth. And there's this meadow, found it years ago when I was tracking someone, where wildflowers grow in colors you wouldn't believe, purple and yellow and white, just covering everything. Sounds peaceful. It is, or was. Might have changed, places do. But you remember it being beautiful. Yeah. Then that's where we'll go, to your meadow. The stranger opened his eyes, looking at her. Might not be able to make it that far. 3 days is a long ride for someone coughing blood. Then we go slow. Take 4 days, 5 if we need to, no rush. Consumption doesn't wait. Then it can catch up with us in the mountains. At least the view will be better. Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the certain knowledge of approaching death, the stranger smiled. All right, the mountains, the meadow. We'll see if it's as good as I remember. They rode through the afternoon, stopping frequently to rest. The stranger's condition was deteriorating faster than he'd expected. The coughing came more often, each bout leaving him weaker, blood flecking his lips no matter how carefully he tried to conceal it. Evelyn noticed but said nothing, just adjusted their pace without comment. By evening, they'd covered less ground than the stranger had hoped. They made camp in a shallow canyon that offered protection from wind and prying eyes. Evelyn gathered wood while the stranger tended the horses, each of them working within their capabilities. The fire caught easily in the dry wood, flames pushing back the gathering darkness. They ate in silence, too tired for conversation, watching stars emerge in the vast sky above. My father used to say the stars were holes in the sky, Evelyn said eventually, places where the light from somewhere better leaked through. That's poetic. He wasn't a poetic man, but he tried. After my mother died, he tried real hard to be both parents. Didn't always succeed, but he tried. That counts for something. Does it? He still left, still gave up when things got hard. The stranger poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward. People break different ways. Your father broke by leaving, I broke by staying and doing nothing. Both are failures, just different flavors. But you're trying to make up for it. No, I'm trying to do something worthwhile before I run out of time. That's not redemption, that's just bookkeeping. Evelyn pulled her blanket tighter against the evening chill. You're awful hard on yourself. You're awful forgiving of me. Someone has to be. You certainly aren't. The stranger had no response to that. They sat watching the fire burn down to coals, each lost in thoughts too heavy for the hour. Eventually, Evelyn's breathing slowed and evened into sleep. The stranger stayed awake, keeping watch, listening to the night sounds and the wet rattle building in his own chest. 3 more days to the mountains. Maybe 4. He could make it. Had to make it. Not for himself. He'd stopped caring where he died years ago. But for Evelyn, who'd chosen to witness his end despite barely knowing him. She deserved the beautiful death she'd signed up for, not some roadside coughing fit in the dirt. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The stranger watched them until exhaustion finally dragged him under, his hand resting on his rifle out of habit that wouldn't break even in sleep. Morning brought worse coughing and fresh blood. The stranger cleaned himself as best he could while Evelyn pretended not to notice. Then they rode on. The hills grew steeper, the air thinner. By afternoon, the first pines appeared, scraggly things at first, then fuller as altitude increased. "We're close," the stranger managed between labored breaths. "Maybe one more day. We can rest if you need to." "No, keep moving. Stopping makes it harder to start again." They pushed through the afternoon, climbing steadily. The stranger's vision blurred at the edges, and twice he nearly fell from his saddle. Each time, Evelyn was there, steadying him with strong hands and quiet determination. As the sun touched the western horizon, they crested a ridge and the stranger's breath caught, not from consumption this time, but from recognition. Below them spread the meadow he remembered, transformed by late afternoon light into something almost holy. Wildflowers swayed in gentle breeze, their colors electric against green grass. A stream cut through the center, water catching the sun like scattered diamonds. "That it?" Evelyn asked softly. The stranger could only nod. They descended carefully, horses picking their way through rocks and roots. When they reached the meadow floor, Evelyn helped the stranger dismount. His legs barely held him, but he stayed upright through sheer stubbornness, unwilling to collapse when he'd made it this far. "Here," he said, voice rough. "This is the place." Evelyn looked around, seeing what he saw, the beauty, the peace, the rightness of it. "It's perfect." The stranger sank to his knees in the soft grass, surrounded by flowers he couldn't name, breathing air that smelled of pine and clean water. His chest hurt worse than ever, but somehow it mattered less here. This was a good place to end. "Thank you," he managed, looking up at Evelyn, "for getting me here." "We're not done yet," she said firmly. "You've got time, maybe days, maybe a week. We'll make camp, get you comfortable. You can tell me stories. I'll listen. And when it's time, I'll be right here." The stranger wanted to argue that he might not have days, that the blood in his lungs suggested hours at best. But Evelyn's face held such fierce determination that he couldn't bring himself to shatter it. "All right," he said. "Stories, I can do that." She helped him to a spot beneath a large pine where the ground was soft with fallen needles. While she set up their small camp, the stranger lay back, looking up through branches at patches of darkening sky. The coughing came again, worse this time, leaving him gasping and tasting copper. But he was here, in his meadow, with someone who cared enough to witness. That was more than he'd dared hope for. That was enough. The stranger didn't die that night, though part of him expected to. He woke instead to dawn light filtering through pine branches and the sound of Evelyn building up the fire from last night's coals. His chest felt like someone had packed it with wet sand, and breathing required conscious effort, but he was still breathing. That counted for something. "Morning," Evelyn said when she noticed his eyes open. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been kicked by a horse." Repeatedly. "That's specific." "I've been kicked by a horse. I know the feeling." She brought him water in a tin cup, supporting his head while he drank. The simple act of swallowing sent pain through his chest, but the water was cold and clean, tasting of mountain streams and things that lived beyond human complications. "I was thinking," Evelyn said, settling beside him with her own cup of coffee. "You promised me stories. Figure now's as good a time as any to start delivering." The stranger managed a weak smile. "What kind of stories you want?" "True ones. About who you were before everything went wrong, before Sarah Merriweather, before the badge and the guilt and all the rest of it." He was quiet for a moment, reaching back through years he'd spent trying to forget. "That's a long time ago. Not sure I remember that person anymore." "Try." So he did. Lying there in the soft grass of his meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and morning bird song, the stranger began talking. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 3 brothers, how his father had been a blacksmith who taught him that good work required patience and precision, how his mother had read to them every night from whatever book she could find, instilling a love of stories that never quite left him. He told her about joining the army at 17, lying about his age, desperate to prove himself a man, about the war that followed. Though he didn't detail the violence, just the exhaustion of it, the way it aged boys into old men before they'd finished growing, about coming west afterward because the east held too many ghosts and the frontier promised fresh starts that rarely delivered. I was 23 when I pinned on my first badge, he said, voice growing softer with memory. Deputy in a nothing town in Kansas. Thought I was going to change the world, clean up the frontier, make it safe for decent people. He laughed, a sound that turned into coughing. When he recovered, his lips were flecked with blood. Took about 6 months to realize the frontier didn't want changing. It just wanted surviving. But you stayed a lawman. For 15 years. Worked my way up to marshal. Made a reputation as someone who got things done. Had offers to run for sheriff in bigger towns, but I always turned them down. Liked the freedom of being a marshal. Could move around. Wasn't tied to one place's politics. Evelyn refilled his water, letting him drink before continuing. What changed? I mean, before Sarah. What started you down the path that led there? The stranger stared up at the sky, watching clouds drift past with the kind of patience only dying men and mountains possessed. I got tired. That's the truth nobody tells you about violence. It's exhausting. Every confrontation takes something from you, even when you win, especially when you win. After a decade of shooting men and watching them die, I just wanted it to stop mattering so much. So you started being more careful. I started hesitating, telling myself I was being strategic when really I was just looking for excuses not to act. And Redemption Creek seemed like the perfect place to slow down. Quiet town, good people. A chance to maybe just keep the peace instead of constantly fighting for it. His expression darkened. Then Jacob Holloway showed up, and I learned that hesitation just gives evil more time to work. They sat in silence for a while, the stranger resting, Evelyn watching the meadow come fully alive with morning. A deer appeared at the far edge, drinking from the stream, completely unconcerned with their presence. It was the kind of moment that felt stolen from time, too perfect to last but real enough while it existed. Tell me about the good arrests, Evelyn said eventually, the ones that mattered before things went bad. So he did. He told her about catching a gang of claim jumpers who'd been terrorizing miners in Colorado, how he'd tracked them for 2 weeks through snow and ice before cornering them in a canyon with no escape. Told her about rescuing a kidnapped child from a group of bandits, returning the girl to her parents unharmed. About breaking up a ring of counterfeiters, stopping a range war before it started, bringing in a killer who'd murdered 5 people across 3 territories. There was this one time, he said, voice gaining strength from the memory. I was tracking a man named Samuel Cross. He'd robbed a bank in Denver, killed 2 guards in the process. Everyone said he'd gone south into New Mexico, but something about the tracks didn't sit right. So I went north instead, into Wyoming. Did you find him? Found him holed up in a trapper's cabin, starving because he didn't know how to live off the land. He was so grateful for the food I brought that he confessed everything before I even asked. Turned out he'd only robbed the bank because his sister needed surgery and he had no money. The guards, he said they drew first, that he just panicked. Did you believe him? About the guards? No, but about his sister? Yeah. Checked into it later. She died while he was awaiting trial. He hanged 3 months after that. The stranger's voice grew distant. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just let him go, let him disappear into the wilderness. Would have saved the territory the cost of a trial and a hanging, and his sister would have at least died with her brother nearby instead of alone. But you brought him in anyway. That's what the badge meant, or what I thought it meant. He coughed again, harder this time. When he could speak, his voice was rougher. Spent my whole career believing the law was what separated civilization from chaos, that following it mattered more than individual circumstances. And maybe it does, but following it didn't save Sarah. Following it just got her killed while I built my perfect case. Evelyn was quiet, absorbing this. Then she said something that surprised him. You know what I think? What? I think you're wrong about the law. It's not the law that failed Sarah. It was you expecting the law to be enough by itself. Law's just words on paper. It only works when people care enough to make it work, and care enough to break it when following it would cause more harm than good. The stranger looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the intelligence and hard-won wisdom in her young face. When did you get so smart? I've been watching people my whole life. Watching them bend and break and compromise, you learn things when you're invisible. She picked a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. My father followed the law, paid his taxes, obeyed the rules, never raised a hand against anyone. And when Boone came, the law didn't protect him. So he left. Chose his own survival over everything else. That's following the law too, the law of self-preservation. You resent him for it. I resent him for not telling me the truth, for pretending he was being noble when he was just being scared. At least you own your fear, own your mistakes. That's more than most people manage. The stranger closed his eyes, feeling the sun warm his face. The coughing came in waves now, each one leaving him weaker, but between the waves there was this: conversation, connection, the simple human comfort of being heard. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a while. "Anything. What are you going to do after, when I'm gone and you're alone up here?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going back." "To Black Hollow?" "Eventually. But first I'm going to ride. See some of this frontier everyone talks about. Maybe head to California. Maybe go north to Oregon. Find out who I am when I'm not defined by the town I grew up in, or the father who left, or the man who saved me." She smiled. "You showed me it's possible to choose your own path. Figure I owe it to myself to actually walk it. That's a good answer. You think I can do it? Survive out here alone? I think you're tougher than you know, and smarter than you believe. You'll do fine. Even if I get scared? Especially then. Fear's not the enemy. Letting it make your choices for you, that's the enemy." They talked through the morning, the stranger's stories growing more fragmentary as exhaustion claimed him. He told her about places he'd seen, the painted deserts of Arizona, the timber forests of Oregon, the wide plains of Nebraska where you could see weather coming from 2 days away. Told her about people he'd met, good and bad, and mostly in between. About meals he'd eaten, horses he'd ridden, sunsets that had stopped him in his tracks with their beauty. Around midday, the coughing got worse. Blood came up in thick clots that the stranger couldn't hide anymore. Evelyn cleaned his face with gentle hands, her expression calm despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "How much time?" she asked quietly. "Hours. Maybe less." "Does it hurt?" "Yeah, but not as bad as watching it scare you." She laughed, a sound caught between tears and genuine amusement. "You're dying and you're worried about scaring me. That's ridiculous." "That's human." The afternoon stretched long and golden, light slanting through trees in ways that made the meadow look painted. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes talking, sometimes just breathing in the way dying men breathe, measured and precious, each breath recognized as closer to the last. During one of his lucid periods, Evelyn asked the question he'd been avoiding thinking about. "Do you think it was worth it? Everything you did in Black Hollow? Was it worth dying for?" The stranger considered this honestly. "I don't know. Ask me again in 10 years when you can see whether it stuck, whether the town stayed free or just found a new fear to kneel to." "I'm asking you now. Do you think you made a difference?" He was quiet for a long time, watching clouds reshape themselves above him. "I think I gave people permission to try. Whether they take that permission and build something with it, that's on them. But yeah, I think standing up mattered more than staying quiet, even if it's just because it proved standing up was possible." "That's all you wanted? To prove it was possible? That's all anyone can do." You can't force people to be brave. You can just show them what bravery looks like and hope they recognize it when they need it. He coughed again, the sound wet and terrible. When he could speak, his voice was barely a whisper. "The thing about fear is it's contagious. It spreads person to person until whole towns are infected. But courage works the same way. One person stands, and suddenly it's easier for the next person to stand, and then the next, until standing becomes normal again instead of exceptional." Is that what you think happened in Black Hollow? "I think I started something. Whether it finishes is up to them." Evelyn wiped her eyes, not bothering to hide the tears anymore. "I wish you could stay, see how it turns out. Me too, but I'm glad I got this far, glad I got here. Glad you're here with me so I don't have to do this part alone." "I'm glad too, even though it hurts. Especially because it hurts. Hurt means you cared. That matters." The sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too vivid to be real. The stranger watched it with the intensity of a man who knew this was probably his last sunset, trying to burn every detail into whatever part of him continued after his body quit. "Tell me about Sarah," Evelyn said suddenly. "Not about her death, about her life. What was she like when she was happy?" The stranger smiled, the expression carrying more warmth than pain for once. "She was always singing. Couldn't carry a tune to save her life, but she sang anyway. While she worked, while she walked, just humming these little melodies she made up on the spot. And she had this way of looking at people, really looking at them, that made you feel seen, important, like you mattered just because you existed." "She sounds wonderful." "She was. The world got smaller when she left it." He paused, breathing carefully. "I used to think about her every day, what she'd look like now, whether she'd have gotten married, had children, all the life she didn't get to live. But lately, I've been thinking more about the life she did live. 16 years of singing and baking and making people feel seen. That's not nothing. That's a life, even if it was too short. Do you think she'd forgive you for not saving her?" The stranger was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. But I think she'd tell me to stop punishing myself and do better going forward. She was practical like that. Didn't see much point in drowning in what couldn't be changed." "Sounds like good advice." "It is. Took me 10 years to start following it." The light faded from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began appearing, first the bright ones, then the dim ones, until the sky was full of them. Evelyn built up the fire against the evening chill, then settled beside the stranger, close enough that he could feel her presence without needing to turn his head. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of watching you die. Of being alone after. Of going back to Black Hollow and finding out it didn't work. That fear won again." "Those are all fair things to be scared of. How do I stop being scared?" "You don't. You just don't let the fear choose for you. Fear says hide. Fear says run. Fear says don't try because trying might fail. You feel all that, acknowledge it, then do what needs doing anyway." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's also living, real living, not just surviving." The stranger's breathing grew more labored, each inhale a conscious effort. The coughing had stopped, which he knew was a bad sign. Meant his lungs were too full of blood to expel anymore. His vision was starting to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in from the periphery. "Evelyn," he managed, "I'm here. Promise me something. Anything. Don't make me into something I'm not. When you tell this story, and you will tell it, I know you will, don't make me into a hero. Don't clean up the rough parts or pretend I was noble. Just tell the truth, that I was a broken man who made mistakes and tried to fix one of them before running out of time. That's enough." Evelyn's voice was thick with tears. "That's not the whole truth, though." "What's the rest?" "That you cared. Even when it hurt. Even when it cost you. You cared about people you didn't know in a town you'd just found. That's not nothing. That's not broken. That's human in the best possible way." The stranger wanted to argue, but he didn't have the breath for it anymore. Instead, he just reached out blindly until he found her hand. She gripped it tight, and they sat like that as darkness fell completely and the stars wheeled overhead. "Tell me about the stars again," the stranger whispered. "What your father said. Holes in the sky, places where light from somewhere better leaks through. That's nice. I like that." His breathing slowed, each exhale taking longer to be followed by an inhale. Evelyn held his hand and talked to him, keeping him tethered to the world with words that didn't require responses. She told him about her mother, about growing up in Black Hollow, about dreams she'd had as a child of seeing the ocean. She told him he'd been brave, that he'd mattered, that she'd remember him. And somewhere between one breath and the next, while she was describing the ocean she'd never seen, the stranger's breathing stopped. His hand went slack in hers. The meadow grew quiet except for the fire crackling and Evelyn's quiet sobs. She sat with him through the night, not ready to let go yet, talking to him even though he couldn't hear. When dawn came, painting the meadow in shades of pink and gold, she finally released his hand and stood. The ground was soft here, easy to dig. Evelyn worked through the morning, carving out a grave beneath the pine tree where he'd rested. She wrapped him in his duster, laid him down gently, and covered him with earth and wildflowers. There was no marker except the location itself. This meadow, this tree, this view. When it was done, she sat beside the fresh grave and spoke to it. "You were wrong about one thing. You said you'd wasted 10 years drifting. But I don't think they were wasted. I think you were learning what mattered and what didn't. Learning how to let go of who you thought you should be and accept who you were. And then when it counted, when you had the chance, you used everything you'd learned to save people you didn't even know. She paused, wiping her eyes. That's the story I'm going to tell. Not about a broken man looking for redemption. About a man who made mistakes and spent his life trying to do better. Who stood up when it was easier to walk away. Who proved that courage is contagious and fear only wins when we let it. The meadow had no response except the wind through pine trees and the eternal movement of water over stone. Evelyn stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and looked around at the beauty he'd chosen for his final view. Thank you, she said to the grave, to the meadow, to the memory of a man she'd known for only a handful of days. For showing me what standing up looks like. Then she mounted her horse and rode south, back toward Black Hollow, carrying in her heart the weight of witness and the lightness of purpose. 3 weeks later, Evelyn rode back into Black Hollow to find it transformed in small but significant ways. The streets were cleaner. Buildings showed signs of fresh repair. People walked with their heads up, making eye contact, greeting each other openly. The town breathed with the kind of tentative confidence that comes from testing yourself and not breaking. Sheriff Elias Reed stood on the boardwalk outside his office, talking with Tommy Curtis. Both men looked up as she approached, relief flooding their faces. Evelyn, Elias said, stepping forward. We were worried. You've been gone so long. I had something I needed to see through. The stranger? He's gone. Found the place he wanted. Died peaceful. Tommy removed his hat respectfully. I'm sorry. Don't be. He got what he was looking for. Evelyn dismounted, tying her horse to the rail. How's the town? Elias and Tommy exchanged glances. Then Elias smiled, a real smile, the first one she'd seen from him in years. It's standing. We had some trouble 2 weeks ago. 3 of Boone's old crew came back looking for revenge. But the town organized, armed themselves, stood together. The troublemakers took one look at what they were facing and rode off without firing a shot. And since then? Since then, people have been rebuilding. Actual rebuilding, not just patching holes. We held elections, got a proper town council, started a school. Claire's organizing a church service even though we don't have a church yet. Figures we can worship under the sky until we build one. And you? Evelyn asked, studying Elias's face. How are you? The sheriff's expression sobered. I got word 3 days ago, from the federal marshals. They found the mining camp where Boone was keeping Michael. He paused, steadying himself. My son died 8 months ago. Consumption. Probably caught it working in the mine shafts. They buried him there. Elias, I'm so... Don't, please. He held up a hand. I've had 3 days to process it. And you know what I realized? The stranger was right. Michael was gone long before I admitted it. And I wasted 3 years trying to save a ghost while real people I could actually help, suffered. That's on me. But I can't change it. I can just do better going forward. Are you? Evelyn asked gently. Doing better? I'm trying, every day. Some days are harder than others. But I'm trying. He straightened, hand unconsciously touching his badge. The marshals are coming next week to help us establish proper law enforcement protocols. Train deputies, set up patrols, create a network with other towns. We're going to do this right. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just relief that the stranger's sacrifice hadn't been wasted. He'd be glad to hear that. The stranger? Yeah. Did he ever tell you his name, his real one? Evelyn thought about it, then shook her head. No, and I don't think it matters. What matters is what he did, not what he was called. Tommy spoke up for the first time. Some people have been asking about him, wanting to know who he was, where he came from. Margaret Chen suggested we put up a marker or something to remember. Don't, Evelyn said firmly. He didn't want to be remembered as a hero, just as someone who stood up when it mattered. Let that be enough. But people should know, sis. People should know that courage is possible, that fear can be beaten, that standing up matters. They don't need a name or a statue to know that. They just need to remember how they felt when they watched him face down Boone, how it made them feel like maybe they could face down their own fears. Elias nodded slowly. All right, no marker, but I'm writing down what happened, all of it, for the record. So someday, when people ask how Black Hollow survived, We'll have the truth to give them. That's fair, Evelyn agreed. Clara emerged from the saloon, moving faster than her age suggested when she saw Evelyn. She pulled the younger woman into a fierce hug that spoke volumes without requiring words. You made it back, Clara said when she finally released her. I did. And him? Gone. Peaceful. In the mountains like he wanted. Clara's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Good. That's good. He deserved peace. They stood together on the boardwalk, four people who'd survived something that should have broken them, watching Black Hollow continue its slow transformation from fear to hope. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. But it was happening. What will you do now? Clara asked Evelyn. Stay? Or are you still planning to see the world? Evelyn looked around at the town that had shaped her, imprisoned her, and ultimately freed her. I'm staying for a while. Help with the rebuilding. Make sure it sticks. Then maybe I'll travel. See that ocean I've been dreaming about. But I'll come back. This is home. Broken or not, it's home. Home's a good place to start from, Clara said, and a good place to return to. Over the following months, Black Hollow continued its transformation. The stranger's actions had started something, but it was the daily choices of ordinary people that sustained it. They chose to attend town meetings instead of hiding, chose to practice with weapons instead of pretending safety would come without effort, chose to trust each other instead of isolating in fear. There were setbacks. A fire destroyed the general store, though Thomas Morton rebuilt it larger than before. A dispute over water rights nearly turned violent before Elias mediated a solution. Two young men got drunk and started a fight that ended with one of them seriously injured. But each problem was faced and handled, not ignored or surrendered to. Evelyn watched it all, bearing witness the way she'd promised, remembering the man who'd made it possible. She told his story, carefully, honestly, to anyone who asked. Not as legend, but as truth. A dying man who'd chosen to spend his final days standing up instead of lying down, who'd proven that one person acting with courage could give permission for others to find their own. The federal marshals came as promised, bringing structure and support. They trained deputies, established protocols, created networks. But they also recognized that Black Hollow had something most towns didn't, a population that had remembered how to care about each other, that had learned the hard way that safety wasn't given, it was built, one choice at a time. 6 months after the stranger's death, Evelyn stood on the hill overlooking town, watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of those last moments in the meadow. Clara had come with her, moving slower now, but still strong, still present. You think about him much? Clara asked. Every day. But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. Now it just feels like, I don't know, like carrying something precious. That's called gratitude. Means he gave you something worth keeping. He gave all of us something worth keeping. Clara nodded, watching the town below come alive with evening lights. You know what I think? What? I think evil survives because good people wait. Wait for the right moment. Wait for someone else to act first. Wait for guarantees that don't exist. And while they're waiting, evil spreads. But then someone stops waiting. Someone stands up. And suddenly waiting doesn't seem necessary anymore. That's what he said, about fear being contagious, but courage working the same way. Smart man. He was. Just took him a while to believe it. They stood in comfortable silence, two women who'd survived fear's grip and emerged different. Not undamaged, but stronger in the places where they'd broken and healed. You still planning to leave? Clara asked eventually. In the spring. I want to see Black Hollow through winter first. Make sure the foundation's solid before I go. And you'll come back? I will. This is home. But I need to see what else is out there. Need to know who I am when I'm not defined by one place. He'd understand that. Yeah, he would. As full darkness fell, they walked back down the hill into town. The streets were no longer silent with fear, but alive with normal noise. Conversation, laughter, the sounds of people living instead of just surviving. It wasn't perfect. Probably never would be. But it was real, and it was theirs, and they'd fought for it. That night, Evelyn sat at the desk in her small room and wrote down everything she could remember about the stranger. His words, his actions, the way he'd faced death with the same calm he'd faced Boone Mercer. She wrote about Sarah Merriweather and Redemption Creek, about consumption and meadows and the cost of waiting. She wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes burned, determined to preserve the truth before memory softened it into myth. When she finished, she read it back and realized she'd written something that wasn't about the stranger at all. It was about fear, about how it spreads and how it's beaten, about the difference between safety and survival, about courage not as the absence of fear, but as the choice to act despite it. She tucked the pages away carefully, knowing someday they'd matter to someone the way they mattered to her now. Then she blew out her lamp and lay in darkness, listening to Black Hollow breathe around her. In the mountains 3 days north, wildflowers continued growing over a grave no one but Evelyn would ever find. The meadow remained beautiful, indifferent to human drama, eternal in its cycle of growth and dormancy. The stranger's body returned to earth, feeding the soil that fed the flowers, becoming part of the landscape he'd chosen. And in Black Hollow, people who'd forgotten how to stand tall slowly remembered. They taught their children that fear was natural, but surrender was optional. That evil prospered not because it was strong, but because good people convinced themselves to wait one more day. That courage was contagious if you let it be. The town wasn't perfect. People still fought, still struggled, still made mistakes. But they faced their problems instead of hiding from them. And that made all the difference. Years later, when travelers asked about Black Hollow's history, the old-timers would tell them about the 3 years of terror under Boone Mercer, about the stranger who rode in and changed everything, about Sheriff Elias Reed finding his courage again, about a town that learned to stand. The stories varied in details but agreed on the important parts. That fear only survives when people let it. That waiting for the perfect moment to act just gives evil more time to work. That one person standing can give permission for everyone else to stand. And sometimes late at night when the wind was right, people swore they could hear singing. A tuneless melody that sounded like a girl who died too young, or maybe just the wind through pine trees in mountains too far away to see. Either way, it reminded them that some debts can never be repaid, only honored by living the kind of life that makes the sacrifice worthwhile. Black Hollow survived, not because of one man's courage, but because that courage proved survival was possible. And sometimes, in a world that often felt too dark and too cruel, possible was enough. Evelyn eventually made it to California, saw the ocean she'd dreamed about, and found it both smaller and larger than she'd imagined. She traveled for 2 years, learning who she was beyond Black Hollow's borders, then returned home to build a school and teach children about courage and fear and the choices between them. She never married, never left again for more than visits. But she lived fully, choosing action over waiting, presence over hiding. And when people asked why she seemed so fearless, she'd smile and tell them about a dying man who taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was just refusing to let fear make your choices for you. In the end, that was the stranger's real legacy. Not the men he'd killed or the town he'd saved, but the permission he'd given others to try, to stand, to believe that their choices mattered. And in a world where fear constantly whispered that nothing mattered, that belief changed everything. The meadow kept its secret. The flowers grew and died and grew again. The stream flowed eternal. And somewhere in the soil, what remained of the stranger rested peacefully, having finally found the sunrise he'd been looking for. Not in one more day of living, but in knowing he'd spent his last days mattering. That was enough. That was everything.